Even in the brightest, most blinding sunlight of a parade, a mother's shadow falls long and cold against the station platform. It is the late summer of a year that will change the world forever, but in the quiet, cobblestone streets of countless small towns, the world is already changing in the smallest, most quiet of ways. The air is warm, heavy with the scent of blooming linden trees and the faint, metallic tang of railway steam. Everywhere you look, there is motion. There is the bright flutter of banners hung from iron balconies, catching the warm breeze. There is the rhythmic, dizzying sound of brass bands playing marching tunes that drift through the open windows of bakeries and schools. On the surface, it is a time of golden, intoxicating triumph. The streets are paved with promises, and the air hums with the illusion of an empire rising, effortless and grand. But if you look closely, past the polished boots and the tossing of flowers, you can see the fragile glass upon which this heavy triumph is built. Let us stand for a moment on the edge of the railway platform. The grand iron roof arches high overhead, trapping the thick white steam of the waiting locomotives. The train cars stretch down the line, an endless ribbon of steel waiting to pull the youth of a nation away from the valleys and forests they have known since they were children. Here, in the swirling steam, the grand illusions of the state melt away, leaving only the profoundly human ache of saying goodbye. A young man stands by the heavy iron door of the carriage. His uniform is impossibly new. The stiff gray wool has not yet been softened by the rain or the dirt, it still smells of the tailor's pressing iron and cedar wood. He is trying to smile. He is trying to look like the heroes on the posters that plaster the town square. But his hands are nervously turning the brim of his cap, over and over. Standing before him is his mother. She does not care about the shifting borders on the map. She does not care about the grand speeches crackling through the radio. She only cares that her son's coat is thick enough for the autumn chill, and that he remembers to keep his feet dry. She reaches out, her hands worn from years of washing and tending gardens, and smooths a wrinkle on his lapel that isn't really there. It is a small, quiet gesture of stalling time. She presses a small parcel wrapped in brown paper into his deep pocket, a piece of hard cheese, a slice of dark bread baked just that morning. Something from home. Something to anchor him to the kitchen table when he is far away in the unknown. They do not speak of the fear. The fear is a heavy, silent thing that sits between them, unspoken but deeply felt. The whistle of the train blows, a long, mournful sound that cuts through the cheering of the crowd. Hands are released. Steps are taken back. And as the train slowly begins to pull away, grinding against the tracks, the smiles falter just for a second. The young men lean out the windows, waving until they are nothing but blurs in the distance, leaving behind a silence on the platform that the brass bands cannot fully cover. Back in the homes, the empty chairs at the dinner table begin to speak volumes. In the evenings, families gather in their living rooms, pulling their chairs a little closer together. The only light comes from the soft, amber glow of the heavy wooden radio dial. The voice that comes from the speaker is confident, soaring, speaking of sweeping advances, of vast territories conquered in a matter of days, of a destiny being fulfilled. The announcer reads a list of cities that have fallen, names that sound strange and distant to the ears of a farmer's wife or a schoolteacher. The world is being reshaped. Yet, in the dim light of the living room, the grand victories feel curiously hollow. The empire is growing, pushing its borders outward into the vastness of the continent, but inside the home, the world is quietly shrinking. A grandfather sits in the corner armchair, the worn upholstery smooth beneath his old, tired hands. He listens to the triumphant music on the radio, but he closes his eyes and remembers another war, a long time ago. He remembers that maps do not bleed, but boys do. He knows the secret that the young men on the trains have not yet learned, that the earth does not care for banners, and that every mile of conquered soil demands a price and sorrow. He smokes his pipe in silence, watching the blue smoke curl toward the ceiling, holding a quiet, private mourning for the peace that has slipped away. Days turn into weeks, and the autumn winds begin to strip the leaves from the oak trees, scattering them like dry gold across the garden paths. The parades in the streets become less frequent, replaced by the steady, rhythmic hum of a society quietly reorganizing itself for an endurance it did not anticipate. And then, the letters begin to arrive. The postman, with his heavy leather satchel and his bicycle, becomes the most important man in the village. Women pause in their sweeping, shopkeepers look up from their counters, watching him pedal down the lane. When he hands over an envelope, it is taken with trembling fingers. These letters, written on thin, folded paper, are handled like fragile artifacts. They smell of distance, of damp earth, and of the faint scent of machine oil. In the quiet hours of the night, by the flickering light of a single candle, a wife reads a letter from her husband. The handwriting is a little rushed, a little uneven, written perhaps by the dim light of a lantern in a foreign field. He does not write about the grand strategies of the generals. He does not write of the glory of the expanding empire. He writes about the rain that has been falling for 3 days. He writes to ask if the roof over the back porch has been patched. He asks if their little daughter has learned to tie her shoes yet, and he mentions, almost as an afterthought, that he misses the smell of the pine trees in the forest behind their house. He writes with a forced cheerfulness, a brave face put on with ink and paper, meant to soothe the worried heart reading it miles away. He writes that the food is fine, that the men are in good spirits, that they will surely be home before the snow falls deep. But between the lines, in the empty spaces of the paper, the wife can read the profound homesickness. She can hear the quiet sigh of a man who realizes that the grand adventure is merely a tapestry of exhaustion, waiting, and hoping for tomorrow. She folds the letter carefully, following the original creases, and places it in a small wooden box on her dresser, a quiet testament to a love suspended in time. The reality of the hollow triumph begins to seep into the everyday lives of the people, not as a sudden storm, but as a slow, creeping frost. The shops in the town square still display signs of prosperity, but the shelves behind the glass windows begin to look subtly different. The coffee poured at the morning table tastes a little thinner, roasted from chicory and grains instead of rich beans from across the sea. The fabric bought for winter coats feels a little coarser to the touch. It is nothing to complain about, they tell themselves. It is a small sacrifice for the grand design. But it is the feeling of a promise unraveling at the edges. The people are told they are the masters of a new, vast world, yet they find themselves quietly mending old socks by the fire, turning the heels so they will last just one more winter. They are told of endless wealth flowing from the conquered lands, yet they stand in orderly, quiet lines at the butcher shop, holding their ration cards tightly in their woolen gloves, hoping there is enough for a Sunday roast. It is a strange, disorienting duality. To look at the map pinned to the wall is to see a giant, stretching its arms across the world. To look at the pantry is to see a quiet, careful rationing of life. The empire was built on a promise of motion, a machine that required endless fuel, endless victories, endless expansion just to keep from collapsing under its own heavy weight. It is a bicycle that must keep pedaling faster and faster, for if it stops, it will surely fall. And the people on the home front, sweeping their steps, tending their gardens, mending their clothes, they can feel the vibration of this runaway machine in the very floorboards of their homes. They do not speak of it aloud. It is too dangerous to voice the quiet dread that blooms in the chest when the radio goes silent at the end of the day. But they feel it. They feel the fragility of the dawn. As the sun sets over the gentle hills of the countryside, casting long, soft shadows across the harvested fields, the world seems so incredibly peaceful. The evening star appears, bright and steady in the violet sky, looking down on the quiet rooftops. Underneath those roofs, mothers are pulling heavy quilts over sleeping children, whispering gentle words into the dark. Wives are staring out the window, looking toward the horizon, wondering where the trains have stopped for the night. They are brave, these ordinary people. Their heroism is not the kind that wins medals or is painted on grand canvases. It is the quiet, everyday resilience of keeping the hearth warm, of writing cheerful letters with aching hearts, of maintaining the gentle rhythms of life while the world outside spins into an unknown darkness. They hold on to the small moments of kindness, a neighbor sharing a cup of sugar, a shared glance of understanding in the market square, the soft purr of a cat resting on a lap. These are the anchors in a sea of hollow triumphs. They are the true, steady heartbeat beneath the loud, brassy noise of the state. As the first frost of autumn touches the window panes, leaving delicate, icy ferns on the glass, the people of the quiet towns close their eyes and try to sleep. They dream not of empires, nor of endless conquests. They dream of the familiar sound of a key turning in the front door, of muddy boots left in the hall, and of a morning where the radio plays only music, and the trains carry only travelers, coming safely home. The heaviest weight a young man can carry is not made of steel or iron, but the soft, unyielding pull of his own tired eyes. It is the late summer, and the coast of northern France is bathed in a pale, quiet mist. Long before the sun dares to break the horizon, the airfields begin to stir. There are no brass bands here. There are no cheering crowds throwing flowers from wrought iron balconies. There is only the damp smell of trampled grass, the sharp scent of aviation fuel, and the gentle, rhythmic ticking of cooling engines from the night before. The world is wrapped in a heavy dew, coating the canvas tents and the silver wings of the waiting machines in a layer of cold, diamond-like moisture. Inside the dim, quiet barracks, young men are waking up. They are barely more than boys, really. Just a few seasons ago, their biggest worries were passing university exams, or helping their fathers in the family bakery, or wondering if the girl with the bright ribbons in her hair would look their way in the town square. Now, they are the tip of a spear that has been thrown across a continent, only to find itself suspended over a dark, restless sea. They rise in silence. In the soft glow of a single kerosene lantern, shadows stretch long and thin across the wooden floorboards. A young pilot sits on the edge of his cot, his elbows resting on his knees, his face buried in his hands. He does not move for a long time. It is not fear that keeps him still, but a profound, overwhelming exhaustion. It is a weariness that settles deep into the bones, a tiredness that no amount of sleep can ever truly wash away. He rubs his eyes, feeling the grit of yesterday's dust, and slowly begins to dress. The flying jacket he pulls over his shoulders is made of thick, heavy leather, lined with warm fleece. When he was first issued this jacket, it felt like a mantle of invincibility. It smelled of adventure and new beginnings. Now, it just feels heavy. It feels like the weight of an entire nation pressing down upon his narrow shoulders. He zips it up against the morning chill, his fingers clumsy and numb, and walks out into the gray, misty dawn. Breakfast is a quiet affair. In the mess tent, the clinking of tin spoons against porcelain cups is the only sound. A mechanic, his hands permanently stained with dark grease, pours hot, thin coffee from a metal thermos. He offers a small, knowing smile to the pilot, a silent gesture of camaraderie that speaks louder than any patriotic anthem. They do not talk about the day ahead. They do not talk about the empty chairs at the table, the spaces where friends sat only yesterday. Instead, they talk about the small things. They talk about the stray dog that has taken up residence near the hangars. They talk about how the French bread is different from the bread back home. They hold on to these small, ordinary pieces of life, anchoring themselves to the earth before they are forced to leave it. When the order comes, it is not a grand, dramatic shout. It is just a quiet word, passed down the line. It is time. The engines cough and sputter to life, shattering the morning stillness. The sound is deafening, a roar that vibrates through the soles of their boots and rattles the teeth in their jaws. The planes roll across the bumpy grass, lifting into the air just as the first rays of sunlight begin to pierce the clouds. As they climb higher into the sky, the landscape of France falls away beneath them. The green fields, the winding rivers, the small villages with their slate roofs, it all shrinks into a patchwork quilt of greens and browns. And then, there is the water. The English Channel. On the grand maps pinned to the walls of distant headquarters, it is nothing but a narrow blue ribbon, a small hurdle to be jumped by a conquering empire. But from the cockpit of a small, fragile machine, it is an ocean. It is a vast, gray expanse of shifting, restless water, cold and unforgiving. It does not care about the speeches of leaders. It does not care about the marching songs or the grand illusions of destiny. It is simply there, a dark, watery moat guarding a misty island. Looking down at the waves, the young pilot feels a quiet dread settle into his stomach. He knows that if his engine falters, if a single piece of metal snaps, all the willpower in the world will not keep him in the air. The Empire has taught him that determination can conquer anything, that the human spirit can overcome any obstacle. But as he watches the dark water rolling silently below, he realizes the cold truth. The ocean cannot be crossed by willpower alone. Gravity and salt water are deaf to the cries of ambition. Ahead, rising out of the sea mist like a pale phantom, are the white cliffs of Dover. They stand tall and bright, catching the morning sun, an ancient fortress wall of chalk and stone. This is the edge of their world. This is where the unstoppable tide finally meets the shore. High above the island, the air is thin and bitterly cold. The sky is an impossible, brilliant shade of blue, so beautiful that it aches the eyes. But there is no time to admire the beauty. Here, in the freezing heavens, the quiet struggle begins. It is not the glorious, soaring dance they were promised in the training films. It is a desperate, dizzying swirl of turning, searching, and surviving. The sun glares through the glass canopy, blinding them. The heavy G-forces press them down into their seats, draining the blood from their heads, making the edges of their vision turn gray and narrow. It is in these moments, miles above the earth, that the exhaustion becomes their greatest enemy. The eyelids grow impossibly heavy. The rhythmic drone of the engine, vibrating through the metal frame of the plane, becomes a hypnotic, soothing lullaby. The temptation to just close their eyes, just for a single second, is overwhelming. They fight it, blinking rapidly, shaking their heads, pinching their own arms through the thick leather. They are fighting a war against gravity, against the wind, but most of all, they are fighting a war against their own desperate need for rest. When the fuel dials begin to dip dangerously low, they turn back toward the sea. The flight home is always the longest. The adrenaline fades, leaving nothing but a hollow, shaking emptiness. The engine sounds different now, rougher, tired, as if it too knows that it has been pushed too far. The pilots watch the French coast approaching with a desperate, silent prayer, their hands gripping the control stick so tightly their knuckles turn white. They land on the same grassy fields, the tires softly thudding against the earth. The planes roll to a stop, the propellers spinning down to a slow, lazy halt. The quiet returns. But it is a different kind of quiet now. It is the quiet of things left undone. As the sun begins to set, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, the young men sit outside their tents. A pilot reaches into the deep pocket of his jacket and pulls out a letter, carefully unfolded. It is from his mother. She writes about the garden, about the apples ripening on the tree, about how the neighbor's cat has had kittens. She asks him if he is eating well, if he is staying warm. She does not ask about the war. She protects him with her innocence, and he protects her with his silence. He finds a pencil stub and begins to write back. He leans the paper against his knee, the fading light casting soft shadows over the page. He tells her that the weather in France is lovely. He tells her that he is safe, that the food is good, that he watches the seagulls over the water. He does not tell her about the white cliffs. He does not tell her about the bone-deep cold of the high altitude, or the terrifying allure of sleep in the clouds. He does not tell her that the grand, unstoppable machine he is a part of has finally found a wall it cannot break. In the twilight, a mechanic walks by, carrying a lantern. He stops, seeing a pilot staring blankly at the ground, a half-finished cup of tea growing cold in his hands. The mechanic reaches out, gently placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. Just a brief, firm squeeze. No words are spoken. None are needed. It is a small moment of profound understanding, a shared acknowledgement of the heavy burden they are all carrying in the dark. As night falls completely over the French countryside, the stars emerge, cold and distant. The pilots lie in their cots, staring up at the canvas ceilings. They are learning a quiet, painful lesson. The empire they were told was invincible is only as strong as the tired boys keeping it in the air. And as they finally close their heavy, heavy eyes, surrendering to the sleep they have fought all day, they know that tomorrow, the ocean will still be there. Wide, dark, and waiting. The war is no longer a bright, brief summer storm. The shadows are growing longer across the channel, and the air is turning cold. There is a kind of silence that only exists in places where the sky is entirely too large for the earth. When the boots of the marching men first step off the familiar, cobbled roads of Europe and onto the soft, shifting dirt of the eastern steppes, the world does not end with a sudden crash. It simply stretches out, taking a deep, endless breath, and begins to pull them into an ocean of dry grass and unblinking sunlight. It is the height of summer, and the air is thick with the sweet, heavy scent of blooming clover and the faint, bitter tang of crushed stems beneath thousands of marching feet. At first, the men walk with the bright, sharp energy of a parade. Their uniforms are neatly pressed, their leather straps are oiled, and the songs they sing echo brightly into the clear blue air. They are carrying the heavy, gilded promises of an empire that believes it can swallow the world just by walking across it. But as the days blur into weeks, the songs slowly begin to fade, swallowed not by the enemy, but by the sheer, incomprehensible vastness of the space around them. In the towns and valleys they left behind, the world was built on a human scale. A man could stand on a hill and see the spire of the next village's church. A forest had an edge, a river had a bridge, and a road always led to a warm hearth by nightfall. But here, the land behaves like a calm, golden sea. It rolls outward in every direction, utterly indifferent to the men moving across it. A soldier looks to his left, and there is nothing but waist-high grass rippling in the wind. He looks to his right, and sees the exact same rippling sea stretching until it melts into the hazy blue edge of the world. The roads are not truly roads at all, but wide ribbons of pulverized earth. With every step, a cloud of fine, pale dust rises into the air. It coats their boots, their trousers, and the damp collars of their shirts. It settles in the fine lines around their eyes and turns their dark hair to a ghostly, chalky gray. They begin to look like phantoms, a quiet army of statues moving slowly through a dream. The mechanical marvels they were told would carry them to swift victory, the engines and the metal tracks, begin to choke on this very earth, coughing and sputtering into silence. And so, the grand, modern conquest is gently, inevitably reduced to the most ancient rhythm of all, the slow, steady placing of one aching foot in front of the other. Within this endless march, the grand illusions of the state burn away in the midday heat, leaving only the quiet, profound connections between the men who walk side by side. Imagine a young soldier, no older than 20, feeling the heavy, abrasive straps of his pack digging into his shoulders. His canteen has been empty since the sun reached its peak. His tongue feels thick, and his lips are cracked from the dry wind. The man walking next to him, a quiet former carpenter with tired eyes and a gentle face, notices the boy's faltering steps. Without a word, the older man unclips his own felt-covered canteen, unscrews the cap, and holds it out. The metal is warm from the sun, and the water inside tastes of tin and dust, but to the young boy, it is the sweetest thing he has ever swallowed. He takes only a modest sip, careful to leave enough for his friend, and hands it back with a small, grateful nod. There are no speeches here about bravery or glorious destiny. There is only the quiet sharing of water in a dry land, a silent promise that they will carry each other through the dust. Millions of horses walk alongside them, their heads bowed, their massive shoulders leaning into the leather harnesses that pull the heavy wooden supply carts. The air is filled with the creaking of wooden wheels, the soft jingling of metal bits, and the gentle, rhythmic snorting of the animals. The soldiers find a strange comfort in the presence of these horses. In a world that feels suddenly alien and overwhelmingly large, the warm, familiar smell of horse sweat and leather is a small tether to the farms and quiet country lanes of home. A soldier might reach out as he walks, resting his hand gently on the warm flank of a passing mare, drawing a quiet strength from the steady, patient endurance of the beast. When the evening finally comes, it does not fall quickly. The sun seems to linger on the horizon for hours, swelling into a massive, trembling orb of bruised orange and deep violet, casting shadows that stretch for miles across the flat earth. As the light fades, the heat of the day vanishes into the sky, replaced by a sudden, creeping chill that settles over the grass. The men drop their heavy packs and collapse onto the earth. They do not bother to pitch tents. They simply lie in the tall grass, wrapping their wool blankets tightly around their shoulders. Small campfires bloom across the steppe like a galaxy of fragile, flickering stars dropped into the dark. By the light of these small fires, the quietest and most sacred rituals of the day begin. A soldier pulls a crumpled piece of paper and a pencil stub from his breast pocket. He rests the paper on his knee, shielding it from the gentle evening breeze. He wants to write to his wife. He wants to explain where he is, but the words escape him. How can he describe a sky that seems to press down on him with its sheer size? How can he explain the feeling of walking for 14 hours, only to look around and feel as though he hasn't moved a single inch? The map in his officer's hand says they have crossed rivers and imaginary lines, but the land itself refuses to acknowledge their progress. So, he does not write about the distance. He writes about the fields of wild sunflowers they passed in the morning, their bright yellow heads turned faithfully toward the light. He writes that he misses the sound of the rain on their tin roof at home. He tells her that he has kept the pressed flowers she sent him safely tucked inside his paybook. He pours all of his love, all of his longing, into the small, cramped letters on the page, folding the paper carefully into a tiny square, a fragile vessel of hope meant to sail across the ocean of earth back to the world he knows. As the fires burn down to soft, glowing embers, the vastness of the Russian night takes hold. It is a darkness so complete, so profound, that it feels almost heavy. The stars above are brilliant and cold, scattered like diamond dust across an unfathomable void. Lying on his back, staring up at the heavens, a soldier feels the terrifying, beautiful realization of his own smallness. The empire that sent him here, the loud voices on the radio, the parades and the banners, they all shrink into nothingness under the quiet, crushing weight of this eternal sky. There is a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the air. The nights are growing longer. The dew that settles on their blankets in the early hours before dawn no longer feels merely damp, it carries a sharp, biting edge. When they wake in the blue light of morning, there is a delicate, silver frost clinging to the tips of the grass. It vanishes the moment the sun touches it, melting into dew, but the men have seen it. It is a quiet whisper from the earth, a gentle warning that the golden days of summer are bleeding away, and that this vast, unyielding landscape has seasons of its own. Yet, they stand up. They brush the frost from their coats, sling their rifles over their weary shoulders, and step back into the road. They walk because it is all they can do. They walk because the home they dream of is behind them, and the only way to return is to somehow reach the end of a horizon that constantly steps back, refusing to be caught. The quiet heroism of these days is not found in the roar of battle, but in the simple, heartbreaking resilience of the human spirit when faced with the infinite. It is found in the weary smile exchanged between two friends coated in white dust. It is found in the gentle pad on the neck of a tired horse. It is found in the folded letter resting close to a beating heart, holding the memory of a small, walled garden against the terrifying beauty of an open world. As they march forward into the shimmering heat haze of the morning, they are no longer conquerors imposing their will upon the map. They are simply men, small and fragile, wading deeper and deeper into an ocean of dry earth and frosted grass, their heavy eyelids blinking against the blinding light, their footsteps swallowed completely by the great, abiding silence of the endless east. There is a moment when the bitter autumn wind stops fighting, and the exhausted sky finally surrenders its first, quiet breath of snow. It does not arrive with the roar of a storm, but rather as a gentle, hesitant fluttering, like white ash falling from a distant, invisible fire. At first, the snowflakes melt as soon as they touch the dark, churning mud of the roads. But the earth is growing tired, and soon, it gives into the cold. The mud hardens into iron ruts. The puddles glaze over with fragile panes of ice. And then, the snow begins to stick, covering the scarred, wounded fields of the east in a seamless blanket of blinding, undisturbed white. It is a beautiful, terrible magic. The vast, overwhelming landscape that had swallowed the summer now pulls a pale sheet over its head, plunging the world into a deep, muffled silence. In the trenches and shallow dugouts carved into the frozen earth, the marching has finally stopped. The grand, sweeping momentum of the empire has been brought to a standstill, not by a wall of steel, but by a wall of winter. The men who sit in these icy burrows are not the same bright-eyed boys who boarded the trains in the warm, golden days of summer. Their faces are gaunt, their eyes hollowed by the endless horizons and the ceaseless dust. Now, that dust has been replaced by a cold that does not merely surround them, but seems to seep into their very bones. It is a living, breathing presence, this cold. It tests the edges of their resolve every hour of the day and night. They were promised a swift, glorious return. They were given uniforms made of thin, elegant wool, tailored for parades and autumn breezes, entirely ignorant of the ancient, unforgiving wrath of a Russian winter. Now, these uniforms feel like paper against the biting wind. The grand illusions of conquest have shrunk down to a single, desperate geometry, the distance between a freezing body and the nearest source of heat. In the dim, smoky light of a bunker, the true, quiet heroism of the front line reveals itself. It is not found in grand charges or booming speeches. It is found in a young man sitting on a wooden crate, carefully unwrapping his boots. His feet are numb, pale, and aching. The soldier next to him, a quiet farmer from a valley far away, reaches into his own pack and pulls out a pair of thick, gray woolen socks. They were knitted by his grandmother, smelling faintly of cedar and home. He does not say a word. He simply tosses them onto the young man's lap. It is a tiny, unspoken sacrifice, a transfer of warmth that means more than any metal ever could. Men stuff crumpled newspapers into their tunics to block the wind. They wrap their heads in torn blankets and burlap sacks, transforming into quiet, shivering ghosts in the snow. When they sleep, they do not sleep alone. They huddle together, shoulder to shoulder, back to back, pooling their fragile body heat in the darkness. In these freezing, subterranean rooms, all the ranks and divisions melt away, leaving only a profound, intimate brotherhood forged in the desperate need to stay warm until the sun rises. And as the days grow shorter, turning the afternoons into long, violet twilights, a new, heavy realization begins to settle over the snow-covered fields. It moves quietly from bunker to bunker, an unspoken truth that hangs in the frozen air. They are not going home for Christmas. The phrase "home before the leaves fall" had been a talisman they carried in their pockets, a whispered promise that kept their legs moving through the endless steppes. But the leaves have fallen, and the branches are now encased in ice. The calendar in their minds, the one that counted down the days to warm hearths and glowing trees, suddenly shatters. To a soldier sitting in the snow, thousands of miles from everything he loves, the memory of Christmas becomes a beautiful, aching wound. He closes his tired eyes and he can see it perfectly. He sees the warm, golden light spilling from the windows of his village. He smells the sharp, clean scent of the pine branches brought in from the forest, the rich aroma of roasting goose, and the sweet, spiced breath of cinnamon and baked apples. He can hear the soft, joyful murmur of his family gathering around the table, the clinking of glasses, the sound of a familiar carol being played on a slightly out-of-tune piano. It feels so real, so close, that he can almost reach out and touch the wax of the candles. But when he opens his eyes, there is only the gray wall of the trench, the howling of the wind, and the relentless, drifting snow. The contrast is almost too much to bear. In the quietest hours of the night, when the wind settles into a low, mournful hum, the letters are written. Writing home is no longer a simple act, it is a battle of endurance and love. A soldier reaches into his coat to retrieve his writing paper. It is crumpled and damp at the edges. He reaches for his small glass bottle of ink, only to find that the dark liquid inside has frozen solid, a tiny block of black ice. He does not give up. He holds the small glass bottle tight in his bare, trembling hands. He cups it against his mouth, breathing his warm, ragged breath over the glass, offering his own scarce body heat to melt the frozen words. He places the bottle inside his tunic, resting it against his heartbeat, waiting patiently for the ink to soften just enough to wet the nib of his pen. When he finally touches the pen to the paper, his hands are shaking so badly from the cold that the letters form in jagged, uneven lines. But the words he chooses are entirely steady. They are brave, beautiful lies, spun from pure devotion. He does not tell his mother that he cannot feel his toes. He does not tell his young wife that the snow drifts higher than the doorway of his dugout, or that the soup they are given is mostly melted ice and a few pale roots. To tell them the truth would be to transfer the freezing weight of this winter onto their shoulders, and he refuses to let them carry it. He is a shield, absorbing the misery so they do not have to. Instead, he writes about the stars. He tells them that the night sky over the endless white fields is clearer and brighter than anything he has ever seen, glittering like crushed glass. He writes that he is wearing the scarf she knitted for him, and that it keeps him perfectly warm. He writes that the men are in good spirits, that they sang a song together around a small fire, and that he is thinking of the way her hair catches the light in the kitchen. He pours all of his longing, all of his gentle, homesick grief into the delicate loops of his handwriting. He wishes them a Merry Christmas. He tells his children to be good, to enjoy the wooden toys he knows his father has carved for them. He folds the paper carefully, sealing inside it a universe of unsaid suffering and boundless love. These letters, making their slow, precarious journey back across the frozen continent, are small miracles of human resilience. They are warm embers carried through a blizzard. Outside, the snow continues to fall. It coats the tops of the sentry posts. It covers the silent, frozen engines of the machinery that was supposed to conquer the world. It buries the grand ambitions of leaders beneath an indifferent, endless white ocean. The empire is frozen in place, paralyzed by the quiet majesty of a winter that does not care for maps or borders. But beneath the snow, the human heart stubbornly continues to beat. The sentries stand their posts, shifting their weight from foot to foot, their breath pluming in the freezing air like the smoke of tiny engines. They look out over the vast, dark emptiness, watching the snow swirl in the pale moonlight. They think of the letters they have written, and the letters they are waiting to receive. They hold onto the memories of warm rooms and soft voices, using them as a gentle fire inside the mind to stave off the dark. As you picture them there, in the deep, quiet isolation of the winter front, let the heavy, peaceful silence of the snow wash over you. The grand machinery of history has slowed to a halt, leaving only the soft, whispering sound of flakes touching the earth. It is a time of waiting, of shivering in the dark, and of holding on tightly to the small, fragile things that make us human. The winter is long, and the snow is deep, but even in the coldest, most desolate corners of the world, the quiet light of love, carried in a frozen letter, refuses to be entirely extinguished. They sleep now, huddled together against the frost, wrapped in the heavy, white blanket of the Russian winter, dreaming gently of a Christmas they can only visit in the warm, quiet shelter of their own minds. Even in the deepest, most silent frost, a single stone dropped in an ocean half a world away will eventually send a ripple to your frozen feet. In the heart of the winter, the world of the soldier shrinks until it is no larger than the few feet of earth that separate him from the wind. The vast, sweeping maps of the empire, with their bold arrows and grand ambitions, no longer exist here. They have been entirely replaced by a different kind of geography. It is the geography of survival. A man knows the exact distance to the small iron stove in the center of the bunker. He knows the precise thickness of the wooden beams holding up the ceiling of frozen dirt. He knows the exact number of hard biscuits left in his pocket, and he measures his life by the slow, agonizing drip of melting snow from a tin cup into a battered pot. The war here is deeply intimate. It is fought against the aching stiffness in the joints, against the heavy, narcotic pull of sleep in the cold, against the quiet despair that settles in the chest when the sun sets just after noon. They are cut off from the rest of the world, buried in a white, endless silence. But the world outside the snow is not silent. It is about to speak, and its voice will carry across continents, across oceans, straight into the dark, smoky hollows of the earth. It happens late in the evening. In the corner of a dimly lit dugout, a field radio sits on an overturned ammunition crate. It is a fragile tether to the world they left behind, its glass tubes glowing with a faint, amber warmth. Usually, it offers nothing but a comforting hiss of static, or a distant, fading song from a broadcaster in a city that feels like a dream. But tonight, the static breaks. A voice cuts through the crackle, reading a news bulletin. The voice speaks of an island, far away in the Pacific. It speaks of a harbor, of ships, of a sudden, fiery dawn in a place where palm trees grow and the water is warm. The young soldiers in the bunker lean in, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the radio dials. They frown in confusion. The names sound exotic, strange, completely alien to their frozen ears. Hawaii. The Pacific. They try to picture such a place. They try to imagine an ocean that is not locked in ice, a sky that is not the color of bruised iron. For a brief, surreal moment, they are transported away from the biting cold, imagining the scent of sea salt and warm sand. Some of the boys manage a tired smile. They hear the words of the announcer, who calls it a great and sudden victory for an ally on the other side of the earth. They clap each other on the shoulder, their heavy, woolen mittens making soft, muffled sounds. A victory is a victory, they tell themselves. Perhaps this means the war will be over sooner. Perhaps this distant triumph will somehow warm their freezing hands. But in the shadowed corner of the bunker, away from the amber light of the radio, an older man sits quietly. He is not a boy. There is silver in his beard, and his eyes carry the heavy, weary look of a man who has seen too much history for one lifetime. He fought in the trenches of another war, decades ago. He remembers the mud of Flanders, the endless waiting, the slow, grinding exhaustion of an empire running out of breath. He watches the young boy smiling by the radio, and his heart sinks with a heavy, profound sorrow. He does not smile. He reaches into his tunic with slow, deliberate fingers and pulls out a battered tin of tobacco. He rolls a cigarette, his hands perfectly steady, and lights it with a small match. The flare of the match illuminates his face for a second, a face etched with a sudden, quiet dread. He breathes out a thin plume of blue smoke, and he closes his eyes. He knows what the boys do not. He knows that the island in the sun is not just a place on a map. He knows what lies behind it. He remembers the sound of the ocean. He remembers the sensation of standing on the edge of Europe, watching the horizon, and seeing the ships appear. He remembers the endless, unbroken lines of men pouring off those ships, men who were well-fed, men whose uniforms were not patched or frayed, men who brought with them the limitless, staggering weight of an industrial giant. He looks at his own boots. The leather is cracked, bound together with rough twine. He looks at his rifle, carefully oiled but worn smooth by years of use. He looks at the young boys, their cheeks hollow, their uniforms smelling of damp wool and wood smoke. And then, in the quiet theater of his mind, he looks across the ocean. He can almost hear it. Beneath the howling of the Russian wind outside the bunker, he hears a different sound. It is not the sound of artillery or the marching of boots. It is the deep, rhythmic thrumming of a world waking from a deep slumber. Far away, across the dark, freezing waters of the Atlantic, a giant is opening its eyes. Imagine it with him for a moment. Picture the vast, sprawling cities across the sea, where the lights are not dimmed for fear of the dark, but burn brightly through the night. Picture the massive doors of factories sliding open, the sudden roar of furnaces igniting, casting an orange, volcanic glow against the sky. Picture the endless rivers of molten steel pouring into molds, the deafening, rhythmic crash of heavy presses stamping out metal, piece by piece, minute by minute, hour by hour. This giant does not tire. It does not feel the cold. Its heart beats to the rhythm of assembly lines, and its breath is the smoke of 1,000 smokestacks. Mothers, sisters, and wives tie back their hair and step into the factories, their hands moving with quiet, determined grace, building the very machinery that will soon cross the water. It is a slow, methodical awakening, entirely devoid of the frantic, desperate energy of the empire. It is the calm, terrifying confidence of a continent that has measured the task and is simply rolling up its sleeves to begin. The older soldier opens his eyes. The radio has gone back to static. The boys have returned to their cots, pulling their blankets over their heads, their brief moment of cheer already swallowed by the cold. The bunker is quiet again. But for the older man, the silence is gone forever. He feels the phantom weight of this waking giant pressing against the fragile wooden beams of their shelter. It is an invisible gravity. Every hammer strike across the sea, every rivet driven into a hull, every engine roaring to life on a distant testing ground, it all adds a microscopic, unbearable weight to the heavy burdens these tired men are already carrying. The war was supposed to be a single, sharp blade. It was supposed to be a swift strike, over before the world could catch its breath. But the blade has become stuck in the ice, and now, the ocean is rising to meet them. The next morning, the sky is a pale, empty gray. The wind has died down, leaving a stillness that feels heavy and expectant. The men emerge from their dugouts, blinking against the harsh, white glare of the snow. They go about their routines. They chop frozen wood. They melt ice for coffee. They stand at their posts, staring out across the empty fields. But there is a subtle shift in the air. The news of the island has settled into their minds, slowly unpacking its true meaning. The older soldiers have spoken in hushed tones to the younger ones, passing on the quiet dread like a shared secret. A soldier sits on an empty ammunition box, his hands wrapped around a warm tin cup. He looks out at the horizon, but he is no longer looking for the enemy in the snow. He is looking through the snow, past the forests, past the mountains, past the borders of the continent itself. He is looking toward the sea. He pulls out a piece of paper to write to his family. His pencil hovers over the page. What can he say? He cannot tell them about the giant. He cannot tell them about the sudden, terrifying feeling of being very small in a world that has just grown infinitely larger. He wants to protect them from the shadow that has just fallen over the trenches. So, his words change. The cheerful promises of a quick return, the confident boasting of the summer, they vanish from his letters. His tone becomes softer, more protective, woven with a quiet resignation. He writes to his wife, asking her to make sure the root cellar is full. He tells her to mend the heavy winter coats, to save whatever firewood she can find, to keep the children close to the hearth. He writes not as a conqueror, but as a man preparing for a very long, very dark storm. He ends the letter with a simple, profound plea: take care of each other. I will do my best to hold my ground. He folds the letter, his hands moving with a slow, heavy grace. He seals it, trusting it to the frozen roads, hoping it will reach the warm kitchen of his home before the storm arrives. The ripple has crossed the sea. It has moved silently through the dark water, invisible and deep, until it reached the shores of Europe, traveling through the wires and the air, finding its way into the frozen hearts of the men in the snow. It is only a ripple now, a faint tremor in the earth, a whispered rumor in the dark. But a ripple, given time and an ocean of water, does not simply fade away. It gathers strength. It pulls the weight of the sea behind it, growing taller, growing wider, until the horizon itself seems to rise up and move toward the shore. The men in the trenches pull their coats a little tighter. They check the bolts of their rifles. They look at each other with quiet, understanding eyes. The grand illusion of a swift and glorious triumph has been completely shattered by a single radio broadcast. The world is awake now. The ocean is turning. And as they stand in the freezing silence, waiting for the days to pass, they know, with a sudden, heartbreaking clarity, that they are standing directly in the path of the tide. There is a heat so profound it does not just warm the skin, but steals the very breath from your lungs before you can even speak. Far from the frozen forests and the heavy, silent snows of the Eastern Front, the map of the empire bleeds into a brilliant, blinding yellow. This is the desert. It is an ocean without water, a vast and rolling emptiness that stretches out beneath a sky of relentless, cloudless blue. Young men who grew up under the soft, green shade of linden trees, who knew the cool, damp gray skies of Europe, now find themselves standing beneath a sun that feels like a physical weight pressing down heavily upon their weary shoulders. When they first arrived, the desert seemed like a blank canvas, a wide and open theater for the swift, mechanical poetry they had been promised. But the desert is not a stage, and it does not yield to the heavy boots of marching men. It is a world made entirely of crushed stone, light, and wind. The sand is not just beneath their feet, it is a living, breathing presence. It rides on the hot, dry breeze, whispering constantly against the heavy canvas of their tents. It finds its way into absolutely everything. It coats the thin, warm soup in their tin cups, adding a gritty texture to every swallowed spoonful. It settles deep into the woven threads of their woolen uniforms, chafing against their sunburned, tired skin. It gets into the delicate, precise gears of their pocket watches, slowly grinding the small hands of time to a halt, as if the landscape itself refuses to be measured by anything other than the slow, burning arc of the sun. The grand steel machines of the empire, the vehicles that were meant to roll effortlessly across the earth to claim new horizons, are entirely humbled here. They bake in the midday sun until the thick iron plating is far too hot to touch. Inside these metal shells, the air is suffocating, thick with the smell of hot oil, old sweat, and burning dust. The heavy tracks spin and dig furiously into the shifting dunes, fighting a landscape that simply moves out of the way, only to slowly, silently collapse back into place the moment they pass. To conquer this desert is like trying to hold water in your bare hands. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips through your trembling fingers. But the true, quiet struggle in this golden wasteland is not the distant army waiting somewhere over the next ridge, nor is it the blinding, suffocating dust storms that turn day into an eerie, rust-colored twilight. It is the constant, quiet ache of thirst. Here, water is no longer just a simple drink. It is liquid gold. It is life itself, measured out in careful, agonizingly precious drops. Imagine a young soldier sitting in the meager, sharp shadow cast by the wheel of a supply truck. He unscrews the metal cap of his canteen. The metal is warm against his calloused palms. He does not take a deep, satisfying gulp. He cannot. Instead, he tilts the canteen just enough to let a single, tepid sip wet his cracked, peeling lips. He holds that small measure of water in his mouth for a very long time, closing his eyes, letting it slowly coat his parched throat, savoring the brief, fleeting illusion of relief. He imagines, just for a second, the cool, rushing water of a mountain stream back home, the sound of it spilling over mossy stones. And then he opens his eyes, and there is only the shimmering heat, the endless dunes, and the blinding light. In this beautiful, terrible desolation, the smallest moments of humanity become profound acts of quiet heroism. Beneath the stretched canvas of a makeshift awning, Two men sit shoulder to shoulder, seeking refuge from the midday glare. They are covered in such a fine layer of pale dust that they look like ancient statues carved from the very earth they sit upon. One of them, a baker from a small village before the war called him away, reaches deep into his pack. He pulls out a small, bruised orange, a rare, impossible treasure saved from a supply drop days, perhaps weeks, ago. Its skin is tough and leathery now, hardened by the dry air. He does not eat it alone. He could, and no one would blame him. But he does not. He carefully, methodically peels away the dry skin, his dusty fingers working gently so as not to lose a single drop of juice. He breaks the fruit exactly in half, and without a word, hands a piece to his friend. They eat in complete silence. The sweet, sharp burst of citrus on their dry tongues feels like a miracle, a sudden, vivid burst of color in a world of sepia and salt. It is a tiny, perfect moment of grace, a quiet rebellion of friendship against the relentless, drying harshness of the sun. As the afternoon wears on, the heat begins to bend the air itself, playing cruel tricks on the weary mind. It creates shimmering, dancing pools of phantom water on the horizon. The mirage wavers and taunts them, looking so incredibly real that a man might swear he can see the ripples on the surface. But as they march toward it, their boots sinking deep into the loose sand, the water constantly recedes, always staying just out of reach. This mirage is the perfect reflection of the Empire's dream in this distant land. It is a glittering, intoxicating promise of endless expansion, of glorious victories just over the next dune, that simply vanishes the moment they try to close their hands around it. They are chasing a horizon that does not exist, burning their youth and their strength for a victory made of thin air and heat. It is only in the evening that the desert finally offers a strange, fragile peace. When the sun at last drops below the jagged edge of the dunes, the sky turns a deep, cooling purple, bleeding into shades of indigo and soft violet. The heat of the day vanishes with startling speed, replaced by a sudden, creeping chill that rises from the cooling sand. The men gather around small, carefully shielded fires, wrapping thick woolen blankets over their shoulders. This is the hour of memories. This is the hour of the letters. A soldier sits near the edge of the firelight, brushing the fine grit from his fingertips. He reaches into his tunic, close to his heart, and pulls out an envelope. The paper is soft, worn thin at the creases from being opened and folded 100 times. He tilts the page toward the flickering orange light. He reads the words written in a familiar, gentle hand. His wife writes to him about a rainy afternoon in their cobblestone square. She writes about the smell of the wet pine trees in the forest behind their house, about the damp earth of her garden, and the cool gray fog that rolls in from the river at dawn. He touches the paper, closing his eyes, trying desperately to feel the moisture of his homeland through the dry, brittle fibers of the page. He wants to step inside the letter, to walk through those damp, green woods, to feel a single drop of cold rain on his cheek. When he finishes reading, he folds the letter with slow, reverent care. As he slides it back into the envelope, a few tiny grains of Sahara sand fall from the folds of the paper, landing silently on his lap. It is a quiet, heartbreaking reminder of the impossible, staggering distance between his parched reality and the green world of his heart. He takes out his pencil to write back. But what can he say? He cannot tell her that he feels as though he is slowly evaporating into the sky. He cannot tell her about the dizzying spell of the mirage, or the way the sand feels like ground glass in his eyes. He protects her with comforting fictions. He writes that the nights are beautiful here beneath the vast canopy of unfamiliar stars. He writes that he is healthy, that the men sing songs around the fire, that he is dreaming of her. He pours his longing into the spaces between the words, hoping she will read the depth of his love, while shielding her from the depth of his exhaustion. As the night deepens, the wind begins its slow, mournful sweep across the empty miles. The stars emerge, brilliant and hard in the pitch-black sky, cold and entirely indifferent to the men sleeping below. The wind moves across the desert floor, acting as a gentle, relentless eraser. The footprints they made during their weary march that day, the deep, heavy grooves of the truck tires, the lines the officers drew in the sand to plan their grand maneuvers, all of it is slowly, methodically brushed away by the blowing dust. By morning, the dunes will be smooth and unbroken once more. The landscape will look exactly as it did 1,000 years ago, as if they had never been there at all. Lying in the dark, listening to the soft rustle of the sand against the canvas of his tent, the soldier feels a quiet, profound understanding settle over him. The Empire is fighting the earth itself, and the earth will always win. They are spilling their youth for a kingdom of dust, fighting for a barren wasteland that will never remember their names, and an empire that is slowly, inevitably, grinding its own gears down into fine, unrecoverable powder. The dream of endless expansion has been swallowed by the vastness of the Sahara, leaving only tired boys, dreaming of rain, waiting for the sun to rise and bake the earth once again. Rest now, let the cool desert night wash over you, and let the gentle wind carry the shifting sands away. There is a profound and terrifying stillness that falls over a city when the final road home is quietly, completely swallowed by the snow. To look upon the city now, wrapped in the deep, breathless slumber of the Russian winter, you would not immediately know it was a place made by human hands. The grand avenues, the bustling squares, the gentle curves of the great, dark river, they have all been erased. In their place is a jagged, silent mountain range of shattered brick, twisted iron, and pulverized stone. The sky above is a permanent, bruised shade of gray, heavy with unfallen snow, pressing down upon the ruins like a heavy lid. But the winter, in its own cruel and indifferent way, has tried to soften the scars. It has draped a thick, seamless blanket of pure white over the sharp edges of the rubble, turning the destroyed city into a vast, sleeping labyrinth of ice. Deep beneath this frozen crust, hidden from the pale daylight, the hunters have realized they are trapped in a cage of their own making. Just months ago, they walked across the golden steppes with the terrifying momentum of an empire that believed it owned the horizon. They were the eagles, the apex predators, moving with loud, brassy confidence across the map. But the map has curled inward, its edges burning away in the cold. The vast, open space of the continent has suddenly shrunk to the size of a single, freezing cellar. The wide, sweeping world has been entirely replaced by 4 damp concrete walls, lit only by the trembling, orange breath of a single, carefully guarded candle. They are no longer a grand army. They are castaways stranded on an island of rubble, surrounded by a rising ocean of frost. In this subterranean world, time has lost its meaning. There is no morning or evening, only the slow, rhythmic breathing of exhausted men and the constant, haunting whistle of the wind moving through the hollow elevator shafts and broken windows far above. The cold here is not like the crisp, biting frost of a winter morning back home, where one might hurry to a warm hearth. It is a heavy, living presence. It sits quietly on their chests. It turns their breathing into pale, lingering ghosts that float up to the ceiling. It freezes the moisture in the air, creating delicate, beautiful chandeliers of ice that slowly lower themselves toward the huddled men below, sparkling faintly in the gloom. It is here, in these dark, forgotten pockets of the earth, that the loud illusions of the state are entirely stripped away, leaving only the purest, most agonizing form of human endurance. Let us look into the dim corner of one such cellar. A group of men sit in a tight, shivering circle. Their faces are wrapped in torn rags and pieces of burlap, their hollow eyes reflecting the tiny, flickering candle flame. In the center of the circle, an older soldier, perhaps a baker or a schoolteacher in another life, holds a pocketknife with trembling, clumsy hands. Before him rests their daily ration. It is a piece of dark bread no larger than a pocket watch, frozen so solid it sounds like a heavy stone when tapped against the concrete floor. He does not rush. He treats this frozen, meager morsel with the quiet reverence of a holy sacrament. He carefully, methodically scores the surface, pressing his weary weight down onto the blade to carve exact, perfectly equal slivers. He hands a thin, translucent shaving to each man. There is no pushing. There is no greed or raised voices. There is only a quiet, solemn acceptance. When he reaches the youngest among them, a boy whose lips are blue, wrapped in a thin blanket that has frozen stiff against his shoulders, the older man quietly slides his own portion into the boy's palm, closing the cold fingers around it with a gentle, lingering squeeze. It is a microscopic gesture in a world of absolute ruin, but in the dark, it shines with an unbearable, beautiful light. Sometimes, the heavy silence of the cellar is broken by a low, distant hum vibrating through the masonry. The men pause. They hold their breath, tilting their heads toward the ceiling, listening to the sound traveling through the earth. It is the drone of transport engines high above the clouds. For a brief, agonizing moment, a spark of hope flutters in the dark. They were promised that the sky would not abandon them, that the great iron birds of the empire would drop warm food, thick woolen coats, and letters from the green world they left behind. They closed their eyes and imagined the wooden crates drifting down softly through the snow, carrying salvation. But the sky is a fickle, distant thing. When the hum finally fades, and the brave few who venture up into the pale, biting wind return to the cellar, their hands are empty. Or worse, they carry the absurd, heartbreaking tragedies of a broken machine, metal canisters filled with thousands of left shoes, or summer uniforms made of thin cotton, or paper packets of black pepper. The empire is blindly throwing its debris into the void, entirely disconnected from the frozen, desperate reality of its dying sons. The men in the cellar do not weep or shout. They simply close their eyes, pulling their rags a little tighter around their necks, and let the fragile spark of hope quietly extinguish itself in the damp air. As the days blur into a continuous, twilight haze, a strange, serene acceptance begins to settle over the underground rooms. The desperate franticness of survival slowly gives way to a quiet, reflective melancholy. The fight has drained out of them, leaving a profound, settling peace. It is time to speak to the ones they will never see again. A soldier sits near a narrow iron grate, where a thin shaft of gray daylight manages to pierce the gloom of the basement. He pulls a small, crumpled piece of paper from his inner pocket. He takes off his heavy, makeshift mittens, exposing hands that are cracked, dark with soot, and stiff with the cold. He holds a tiny pencil stub, breathing his warm, ragged breath onto the lead, trying to soften it enough to find the words. He knows, with a quiet, breaking heart, that this letter will never leave this room. The ring around them is closed forever. There are no more planes taking off from the cratered, snow-swept airstrips. There are no more trains crossing the frozen river. He is writing a letter to a ghost, placing his words into a bottle that will never be thrown into the sea. Yet, his hand begins to move. He writes because it is the only way to touch his wife's face one last time. He writes because forming the familiar curves of his daughter's name anchors his soul to the earth for just a few moments longer. He does not write of the hunger, or the sound of the collapsing buildings. He does not write of the terrifying cold or the trap they are in. He writes of the past, and he writes of a gentle future he knows he will not inhabit. He tells his wife that he was thinking of the day they walked by the lake, and how the late summer sun caught the edge of her dress. He tells her that he is sorry he will not be there to plant the garden in the spring. He tells her to tell their children that he was brave, even if he feels only like a tired, frightened boy waiting in the dark. He pours every ounce of his remaining warmth into the delicate loops of his handwriting, spinning a protective cocoon of love around his family, miles away. As he writes the final words, a single tear escapes his heavy eyelids. It tracks slowly down his dirt-streaked cheek, a warm, salty drop of pure sorrow. But the air in the cellar is so incredibly cold that before the tear can reach his chin, it stops. It freezes solid. It becomes a tiny, glittering diamond of ice resting on his skin, a frozen monument to a love that the war could not entirely erase, even at the very end of the world. He folds the paper meticulously, smoothing the edges with his numb thumb. He tucks it deep inside his tunic, resting it directly over his slow, tired heartbeat. Around him, in the dim light of the candle, dozens of other men are doing exactly the same. The cellar is filled with the soft, rustling sound of paper, the quiet murmur of 100 silent goodbyes. They are turning their own pockets into tiny, personal mailboxes, filled with letters that will wait in the dark for a postman who will never arrive. Outside, the wind howls through the jagged teeth of the ruined factories, sweeping the snow into massive, sculpted drifts that bury the doorways and the streets. The great, churning machine of the war continues its distant, muffled roar miles and miles away, but inside this shattered city, the fight is over. The predator has been caught, tamed by the ice, and gently reduced to a fragile, shivering human core. The men in the cellar lean their heads back against the concrete walls. The exhaustion is no longer a painful, biting ache. It has transformed into a heavy, warm blanket, inviting them to finally rest. The cold, once a terrifying enemy, begins to feel strangely gentle, whispering softly to them, urging them to close their heavy, heavy eyes. They huddle together, a tangled knot of weary men, sharing the last, fading warmth of their bodies in the dark. They do not dream of victories or marching bands. They dream of soft beds with thick quilts, of warm soup on a wooden table, of the sound of a loved one's voice calling them gently from the kitchen. They drift away on these quiet, beautiful dreams, as the snow continues to fall outside, gently, endlessly, burying the city of frozen tears in a deep, undisturbed, and eternal slumber. There is a slow, quiet kind of breaking that does not happen on a battlefield, but in the tired hands of a woman trying to mend a thread that is simply worn too thin. When we think of how a war is lost, we often picture the sudden, thunderous collapse of a front line, or the dramatic sweep of arrows across a general's map. But there is another kind of defeat, one that is entirely invisible, entirely silent, and infinitely more profound. It is the defeat of the soil, of the forge, of the loam. It is the slow, creeping exhaustion of a nation that has simply run out of the things it needs to keep the fire burning. Long before the final shots are fired, the empire begins to hollow out from the inside. Step into a small, dimly lit workshop in a German city, long after the sun has set. The windows are heavily draped in thick, black paper to hide the light from the sky above. Inside, under the weak, sickly glow of a single, blue-tinted bulb, an old man stands at a metal lathe. He is far past the age of soldiering. His face is deeply lined, the creases in his skin permanently stained with dark grease and the metallic dust of 1,000 long nights. He is holding a broken gear in his calloused hands. In the bright, arrogant days of the early war, a broken gear would have been tossed aside, immediately replaced by a fresh, gleaming part straight from a massive factory. But those days belong to another lifetime. Now, the grand factories are tired. Their belts are fraying, their furnaces are choking on inferior coal, and the bright, strong steel of the past has been replaced by brittle, recycled scrap. And so, the old mechanic does not throw the gear away. He sets it gently on his workbench. He searches through a wooden crate filled with rusted odds and ends, the discarded bones of broken machines, until he finds a piece of metal that is roughly the right size. With a heavy, rasping file, he begins the slow, agonizing work of grinding the scrap down by hand, trying to shape it into something that might hold together for just a few more miles. Listen to the sound of his file scraping against the iron. It is a slow, weary rhythm. It is the sound of an empire trying to patch its own crumbling foundation with nothing but willpower and dust. He knows the metal is weak. He knows that the engine he is repairing will likely fail again, perhaps on a frozen road miles away, stranding the young boys he is desperately trying to protect. But he keeps filing, his shoulders hunched beneath the dim blue light, fighting his own quiet, desperate war against the exhaustion of the world. This exhaustion seeps into every corner of the home front, touching the quietest, most private moments of daily life. In a cold kitchen miles away, a mother stands before her small, iron stove. The fire inside is meager, fed by damp wood and whatever scraps of coal she could sweep from the cellar floor. She is making coffee, but it is not the rich, fragrant coffee that used to arrive on ships from across the sea. The sea is close to them now. Instead, she boils water over ground acorns and toasted chicory root. The steam that rises from the pot smells earthy and bitter, a faint, sad imitation of the life she used to know. She pours the dark liquid into a chipped porcelain cup and sits at the kitchen table. In her lap rests a woolen sweater that once belonged to her husband. It is old, worn through at the elbows. Slowly, methodically, she begins to unravel it. She pulls the yarn, undoing the stitches one by one, watching the garment dissolve into a curly, tangled pile of thread. The empire has no more wool to give her, so she must dismantle the past to clothe the future. She takes her knitting needles and begins to loop the old, tired yarn into a pair of thick socks for her son, who is shivering in a trench somewhere in the vast, white east. As she knits, she feels the coarse, brittle texture of the wool. It has lost its warmth. It has lost its strength. Just like the metal in the mechanic's shop, the fabric of her life is wearing thin, stretched beyond its natural limit. She is a brave woman, facing the dark days with a quiet, stoic dignity, but in the silence of her kitchen, she cannot help but feel a profound, settling weariness. She is trying to keep her family warm with shadows and substitutes. And while the mother knits her unraveled yarn, and the old man files his brittle scrap, a very different rhythm is echoing from far across the dark, vast ocean. It is a heartbeat. At first, it was only a faint murmur, a distant tremor felt through the floorboards of the world. But month by month, year by year, it has grown louder, deeper, and infinitely more terrifying. It is the relentless, booming heartbeat of an untouched continent waking to the full, staggering scale of its own power. Imagine closing your eyes and flying across the Atlantic, leaving the cold, darkened cities of Europe behind. You arrive in a land where the night sky is not a source of fear, but a canvas of brilliant, unbroken light. The factories here do not hide behind black paper. They stretch for miles, vast cathedrals of glass and steel, bathed in the fierce, electric glow of endless production. Inside these brightly lit halls, there is no quiet filing of scrap metal. There is only the deafening, majestic roar of abundance. Thousands of women, their hair tied back in bright scarves, stand side by side along assembly lines that never stop moving. They are riveting the silver skins of massive bombers. They are pouring rivers of bright, molten steel into perfectly formed molds. They are stitching millions of thick, warm coats from bolts of heavy, flawless wool that seem to stretch into infinity. There are no shortages here. The coal runs in deep, black rivers from the mountains, the oil flows like a dark, heavy heartbeat from the earth. When a machine breaks, it is swept away and replaced before the echo of its failing even fades. It is a terrifying, beautiful avalanche of industry. It is a tidal wave of sheer material, gathering height and weight across the ocean, preparing to crash against the tired, patched-together walls of the old world. The people of the German home front cannot see these bright factories. They cannot see the endless rows of polished tanks rolling out into the American sunshine, or the thousands of ships sliding gracefully into the water. But they can feel it. They feel it in the skies above their cities, where the hum of enemy bombers grows thicker and heavier with every passing season. They feel it in the shrinking rations, in the hollow promises on the radio, in the quiet, desperate realization that no amount of bravery can outlast a mountain of steel. But nowhere is this invisible defeat felt more keenly than on the front lines, in the freezing mud and the blowing sand, where the tired sons of the empire finally come face to face with the ghost of endless supply. A young German soldier sits in the corner of a captured trench. The fighting has paused, leaving a strange, ringing silence in its wake. He is exhausted. His uniform, made of synthetic fibers and wood pulp, is stiff with dirt and provides no warmth against the biting wind. His boots are cracked, the thin leather giving way to the damp earth. Beside him rests a wooden supply crate, left behind by the retreating Allied troops. He pries the lid open with his bayonet, the wood splintering softly. He expects to find what he always finds in his own supply drops: thin soup packets, sawdust bread, rusted ammunition. Instead, he stares into the crate, and his heart sinks with a heavy, devastating sorrow. He reaches inside and pulls out a heavy tin can. It is perfectly sealed, gleaming in the dull light, wrapped in a bright, colorful paper label. He opens it, and the sweet, rich scent of peaches and heavy syrup fills the cold air. He finds thick, soft woolen blankets, entirely unpatched. He finds blocks of pure, white soap that smell of lavender and clean water. He finds boots made of thick, supple leather, with strong rubber soles that seem completely immune to the weather. He does not feel anger. He does not feel hatred for the men who left these things behind. He only feels a profound, crushing emptiness. He holds a heavy brass zipper from a captured jacket in his freezing fingers, marveling at the sheer weight of it, the careless, magnificent waste of precious metal. In his homeland, a family would have to surrender their brass doorknobs to the state just to make a single bullet casing. Here, the enemy uses it simply to keep the wind out of a coat. In that quiet moment, holding the sweet peaches and the heavy brass, the young soldier understands the truth that the generals refuse to see. They are not fighting an army of men. They are fighting a machine that has no end. They are fighting an ocean. And you cannot defeat an ocean by throwing stones into the waves. That evening, by the light of a flickering stub of a candle, the soldier writes a letter to his mother. He rests the paper on his knee, his handwriting slow and careful. He does not write about the tactical movements of his unit. He does not write about the grand, sweeping ideologies that sent him to this cold, muddy field. He writes about the peaches. My dearest mother, he writes, today I saw something that made me so terribly sad. I saw the things they carry. They have so much, mother. They have thick coats, and real coffee, and boots that do not let the water in. We are so tired, and our clothes are so thin. I am trying to be brave, just as you asked me to be. But the world feels so very heavy today, and I am so deeply tired of being cold. He folds the letter, sealing his quiet despair within the delicate paper, and sends it back to the dark city, where his mother sits knitting with old, brittle yarn, and the mechanic files his rusted scrap. They are bound together by a gentle, shared heartbreak. They are people slowly suffocating under the weight of an invisible giant. The grand, arrogant dreams of conquest have completely evaporated, leaving only the quiet, desperate struggle to simply make it through the night. As you lie in the dark, listen closely. Past the silence of the room, past the rhythm of your own breathing, imagine the distant, rhythmic hum of a world waking up across the water. It is a slow, steady, inescapable pulse. It is the sound of an endless tide coming in, gently and inevitably washing away the crumbling, exhausted castles of the old empire, leaving nothing behind but the quiet, settling peace of the dust. Even the heaviest armor cannot protect a man from the quiet realization that his journey has come to an end. It is the absolute height of summer, and the vast, rolling steppes of the east are drowned in a sea of waist-high, golden green grass. From a distance, the landscape is a portrait of perfect, unbroken peace. The air is thick with the sweet, heavy perfume of wild clover, blooming sunflowers, and the dry, baked earth. Millions of crickets sing their rhythmic, hypnotic song into the warm breeze, rising and falling like the breathing of the world itself. The sky is an impossibly wide canopy of pale, hazy blue, dotted with small, lazy clouds that cast slow-moving shadows across the endless fields. But beneath the gentle rustle of the wind, hidden within the tall stalks of grass, there is another sound. It is a low, weary hum. It is the sound of thousands of tired engines, ticking and groaning in the summer heat. Here, in the vast fields, the steel giants of the empire have gathered. But they do not look like the invincible, shining machines that once rolled proudly across the cobblestones of Europe. They are coated in a thick, powdery layer of pale dust. Their paint is chipped and scarred, their heavy iron tracks worn smooth by thousands of miles of endless, unforgiving marching. They look like great, exhausted beasts, resting heavily in the tall grass, panting in the midday sun. Inside these metal shells, the air is stifling, suffocating, and perfectly still. To be a crewman inside one of these machines is to live in a dark, cramped oven of iron and grease. The heat of the summer sun beats down on the metal roof, turning the interior into a slow-roasting kiln. The air smells intensely of diesel fumes, hot engine oil, cordite, and the sharp, sour scent of old sweat. In the driver's seat of one such machine, a young man sits with his hands resting lightly on the heavy steering levers. His uniform is stripped down to a thin cotton undershirt, dark and heavy with moisture. His face is smeared with black grease, his eyes framed by the pale, clean circles left by his heavy goggles. He is barely 20 years old, yet his hands move with the slow, deliberate care of a much older man. He is tired. It is a weariness that has seeped through his skin and settled permanently into his bones. Next to him, the radio operator sits slumped against the curved metal wall, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. He holds a small, damp cloth. Without opening his eyes, he wordlessly passes the cloth to the driver. The driver takes it, wiping the stinging salt and dust from his eyes, and hands it back. It is a small, intimate gesture of survival, a quiet brotherhood forged in the suffocating dark. They do not speak. The roar of the engine, even at a low idle, makes conversation impossible, but they do not need words. They share the same heavy air, the same cramped space, the same silent, unspoken dread of the days ahead. They are waiting for the order to move. They have been told that this is the moment. This is the great push, the summer offensive that will break the deadlock and open the endless plains once more. The maps have been drawn, the arrows point forward, and the officers have spoken of a glorious, sweeping victory. But as the driver rests his forehead against the warm glass of his narrow viewing block, looking out at the endless green ocean of grass, he feels no glory. He feels only the heavy, dragging weight of the machine around him. He knows every cough, every rattle, every agonizing groan of the engine behind him. He knows that the metal is tired. He knows that the gears are worn, and that the oil is thin. The machine is a reflection of his own exhausted soul. When the signal finally comes, it is not a triumphant charge. The driver pulls the heavy levers toward his chest. The great engine behind him roars in protest, a deep, mechanical cough that shudders through the entire steel frame. The heavy tracks bite into the dry earth, squeaking and grinding against the sprockets, and the machine lurches slowly forward, pushing its way into the tall grass. They move like swimmers wading through deep, heavy water. The grass parts before the steel hull, folding beneath the heavy tracks, releasing the sweet scent of crushed stems into the hot air. Through the narrow slit of his visor, the driver sees nothing but the green and gold stalks waving against the glass. It is a strangely beautiful, hypnotic sight, entirely detached from the grim reality of the war. But the earth itself seems to have changed. In the early years, the ground seemed to welcome their speed, unfurling before them like a grand highway. Now, the earth resists. They crawl forward, hour after hour, baking in the suffocating heat of the iron box. The engine temperature gauge slowly, inevitably climbs toward the red line. The air inside becomes so thick it is difficult to draw a full breath. They drink from their metal canteens, but the water is hot and tastes of tin, offering no relief. The commander, standing in the turret above, looks out over the fields. He searches the horizon for the open space, for the clear path that will let them run free. But the path does not exist. As they push deeper into the fields, they do not find the breaking point of the enemy. Instead, they find a landscape that has been turned into a vast, impenetrable fortress of earth and hidden steel. There are no sweeping flanks to exploit, no open roads to race down. Every mile is a grinding, agonizing struggle against a defense that seems to stretch all the way to the end of the world. There is no sudden, dramatic moment of defeat. There is no grand collapse. There is only the slow, melancholic realization that they cannot go any further. The tank grinds to a halt at the edge of a shallow ravine. The driver pulls back the levers, and the engine drops into a low, rattling idle. He wipes his face with the back of his trembling, grease-stained hand. He looks up at the commander's boots, dangling from the turret above. The commander does not order them forward. He does not shout. He simply rests his heavy arms on the edge of the open hatch, looking out at the rolling hills, the endless lines of dug-up earth, and the smoke drifting lazily into the summer sky. In the quiet, stifling interior of the tank, the crew feels a strange, profound shift. It is the invisible, silent breaking of a spell. For years, their entire existence has been defined by forward motion. The Empire was built on the promise of the attack, on the intoxicating momentum of always pushing the horizon further away. But sitting here, in the tall, beautiful grass, listening to the tired ticking of their own overworked engine, they understand that the momentum is gone. The wave has finally broken against the shore, and it is beginning to roll back. It is a surrender, but not a surrender of arms. It is the surrender of the spirit. It is the quiet, heavy acceptance that they are no longer the masters of this vast continent. They are merely survivors, trapped in metal boxes, stranded in an ocean of grass that does not care about their borders or their dreams. As the late afternoon sun begins to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of peach and lavender, the commander orders the engine to be shut down. The silence that follows is startling. The ringing in their ears slowly fades, replaced by the gentle rustle of the wind and the returning song of the crickets. The crew pushes open the heavy steel hatches and climbs out onto the hull. The air outside is still warm, but compared to the oven of the interior, it feels like a cool, refreshing spring. They sit on the dusty iron plates, their legs dangling over the sides. The metal beneath them ticks and pings softly as it begins to cool in the evening air. They pass a canteen back and forth, savoring the small, quiet peace of the twilight. The radio operator, a quiet boy who used to play the violin in his school orchestra, pulls a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. He smooths it out against the sloping steel armor of the turret. He finds a small stub of a pencil and begins to write. He writes to his older sister, who lives in a tall, narrow house by a quiet canal. He does not write about the invisible wall they have hit. He does not write about the terrifying, claustrophobic heat, or the smell of burning oil, or the melancholic dread that has settled in his chest. He writes about the sunset. He tells her that the fields here are whiter than the ocean, and that the grass glows like spun gold in the evening light. He writes that he saw a hawk circling high above the clouds, completely free, riding the warm thermals of the summer air. "I am so very tired," he writes, his handwriting small and neat. "The days are long, and the machine is heavy. But when I close my eyes, I try to remember the sound of the water against the stones beneath your window. I try to remember the cool shade of the willow tree in the garden. Please, do not worry for me. We are resting now. The engines are quiet, and the wind is gentle." He folds the letter carefully, leaving a small, dark smudge of grease on the corner of the paper. It is a tiny, fragile piece of his heart, sent out into the void, a whisper of love trying to escape the heavy, suffocating grip of the steel. The other men watch him quietly. They share his unspoken longing. They look out over the vast, darkening fields, no longer seeing a map to be conquered, but a terrifying, endless distance that stands between them and their homes. They realize, with a soft, aching sorrow, that the path forward is closed forever. There are no more grand offensives to dream of. There are only the long, grueling miles backward, fighting for every step, carrying the crushing weight of a failing empire on their tired, narrow shoulders. Night falls softly over the steppe. The stars emerge, brilliant and scattered like diamond dust across the deep, violet sky. The giant steel machines sit silently in the tall grass, looking like ancient, forgotten monuments to a pride that has finally exhausted itself. The men wrap themselves in their thin blankets and lie down on the cooling iron decks. They close their eyes, listening to the gentle sighing of the wind through the clover. They let go of the grand illusions. They let go of the maps and the marching songs. They surrender to the quiet, heavy peace of the summer night, dreaming only of the day when they can finally step down from the steel, wash the dark grease from their hands, and walk softly, quietly, all the way home. There is a particular kind of darkness that falls not from the setting of the sun, but from the sudden, terrifying eclipse of a shadow passing across the moon. For years, the war was a story told from far away. It was a distant, static-filled voice on the living room radio, speaking of strange rivers, endless steppes, and burning deserts. It was a shifting line on a paper map, a parade of flags in the town square, a promise of a horizon constantly expanding outward. The people in the quiet towns and bustling cities of the homeland had been told that the walls of their empire were made of iron, and that the sky above their rooftops would forever belong to them. But the sky is a vast and borderless ocean, and eventually, the tide that was pushed out so violently must inevitably rush back to the shore. It begins in the deepest, quietest hours of the night, when the world is wrapped in the heavy velvet of sleep. The silence of the city is broken not by a sudden crash, but by a low, mournful wail. The air raid siren. It is a haunting, mechanical cry that rises and falls like the breathing of a wounded metallic beast. It weaves its way through the empty streets, slipping through the cracks of locked windows, pulling the people from their warm beds. There is no panic. Panic takes too much energy, and the people are already so profoundly tired. Instead, there is a practiced, quiet resignation. In a small bedroom on the second floor of a brick apartment building, a mother moves through the dark. She does not turn on the light. The windows are strictly blacked out, covered in heavy, dark paper, but she knows every inch of this room by heart. She reaches out and gently shakes her young daughter's shoulder. The child stirs, rubbing her eyes, her face soft and warm with sleep. The mother does not rush her. She whispers that it is time to go downstairs, her voice steady, soothing, masking the heavy, frantic beating of her own heart. By the door sits a small, battered leather suitcase. It is the most important object in the house. Inside is not clothing for a journey, but the fragile, irreplaceable anchors of their lives. There is a stack of official papers, a handful of ration cards, a small tin of saved coins, and an old photograph album filled with faces of men who are currently shivering in the snow thousands of miles away. This small suitcase is the quiet acknowledgement that everything else, the heavy wooden wardrobe, the porcelain tea set, the embroidered pillows on the sofa, might be gone by morning. The mother takes the suitcase in one hand and her daughter's small, warm hand in the other. They step out into the hallway, joining a silent procession of neighbors moving down the narrow, wooden stairs. They are like ghosts, wrapped in heavy wool coats over their nightgowns, their faces illuminated only by the weak, yellow beam of a single flashlight pointing down at the floorboards. They descend beneath the earth, into the cellar. Once, this space was a place of quiet, domestic comfort. It smelled of damp soil, aging apples, and the sweet, heavy scent of plum preserves sealed in glass jars. It was a place to store the harvest for the winter. Now, the wooden shelves have been pushed aside to make room for wooden benches and thin cots. The heavy wooden door is shut tight, barred from the inside, sealing them into a tiny, subterranean world. The air in the cellar is thick and close, smelling of coal dust, old dampness, and the faint, nervous sweat of a dozen people crowded together. The flashlight is turned off to save the battery, and a single, thick candle is lit in the center of the room. It casts long, dancing shadows against the brick walls, making the cavernous space feel entirely separate from the world above. Here, in the dim, flickering orange light, the true, agonizing weight of the war comes home to roost. The people sit shoulder to shoulder. An elderly man, who remembers the hunger of the last war, sits with his hands resting quietly on his cane, staring deeply into the flame of the candle. A young woman holds a sleeping infant against her chest, swaying gently back and forth, humming a lullaby so softly it barely makes a sound. And the mother sits with her daughter wrapped in a thick, gray blanket on her lap. Then, the sound begins. It does not start as an explosion. It starts as a vibration. It is a deep, resonant hum that seems to travel through the very bones of the earth, vibrating upward through the soles of their shoes and into their chests. It is the distant, synchronized heartbeat of hundreds of heavy, four-engine bombers moving slowly, methodically across the night sky. The Empire had awakened a sleeping giant across the sea, and now the giant is walking across their roof. The humming grows louder, transforming the air in the cellar into a heavy, suffocating pressure. And then, the distant thuds begin. They are muffled by the layers of brick and dirt above them, sounding like the footsteps of an angry giant stomping across the horizon. With each dull thud, the wooden beams of the cellar ceiling groan. A fine, powdery rain of dust falls from the rafters, coating their hair and their coats in a pale, ghostly gray. The candle flame shivers, threatening to go out, before snapping back to attention. The little girl whimpers, burying her face into her mother's thick coat. She is terrified by the shaking of the earth. The mother wraps her arms tighter around the child, creating a small, impenetrable cocoon of warmth and love in the dark. She leans her head down, pressing her lips to the top of her daughter's dusty hair. She knows she cannot stop the sky from falling. She cannot reach up and turn away the heavy metal machines dropping fire onto their streets. But she can protect the fragile, beautiful landscape of her child's mind. She begins to whisper a story. She speaks of a magical forest, far away from the city, where the trees are made of spun sugar and the rivers flow with warm milk. Her voice is a calm, steady river, flowing smoothly over the jagged, terrifying sounds of the earth shaking above them. When a particularly heavy rumble rattles the jars of preserves on the shelves, the mother smiles gently in the dark and whispers, "Do you hear that? That is the sound of the great, clumsy bears rolling down the hill to catch the honey." She weaves a blanket of beautiful, comforting lies. She turns the terrifying thunder of a collapsing world into the gentle, whimsical sounds of a fairy tale. It is an act of profound, invisible heroism. While the grand armies of the state are crumbling on distant fronts, this mother is holding an entire world together in the dark corner of a dusty basement, armed with nothing but her imagination and her boundless love. But inside her own mind, behind the soft words of the fairy tale, the mother's thoughts are heavy with a quiet, devastating sorrow. She remembers the early days. She remembers the bright, arrogant summers when the radio played triumphant marches, and the streets were lined with cheering crowds throwing flowers at the boots of marching boys. They were told they were invincible. They were told the world belonged to them. Now, sitting in the cold dirt, listening to her city being torn apart brick by brick, she realizes the profound, tragic irony of it all. The Empire had marched out to conquer the earth, entirely forgetting that the earth is round. The destruction they had so willingly exported to the valleys of France, the plains of Poland, and the deep snows of Russia had simply circled the globe and found its way to their own front door. The grand, sprawling map of conquest had shrunk until it was nothing more than the four damp walls of this cellar. The people in the dark share this silent, collective grief. There is no anger in the basement, no loud cries of defiance. There is only a deep, settling melancholy. They are ordinary people, bakers, teachers, watchmakers, and mothers, who have been dragged into the center of a storm they cannot control. They are paying the terrible, fiery price for the hubris of men they will never meet. An old woman sitting across the cellar reaches into her pocket. Her hands are gnarled with arthritis, trembling slightly in the cool air. She pulls out a small, crumpled piece of wax paper. Inside is a single, hard peppermint candy. She looks across the dim space, catching the mother's eye, and gives a small, tired nod. The old woman leans forward and gently places the peppermint into the little girl's hand. It is a tiny, almost microscopic gesture. In the face of the roaring sky above, a piece of candy means absolutely nothing. But in the deep, suffocating dark of the cellar, it means everything. It is a quiet rebellion of kindness against the cruelty of the night. It is a reminder that even when the world is shaking, Even when the sky is on fire, humanity can still be found in the gentle sharing of a sweet on a dusty floor. The hours stretch on, heavy and dark. The rumble of the plains slowly fades, replaced by the crackling sound of burning wood and the distant, frantic bells of fire engines. But the people in the cellar do not move. They wait. They listen to the settling of the earth, holding their breath until the siren finally wails again, this time a long, steady, unbroken note. The all clear. Slowly, stiffly, the neighbors rise from their benches. They brush the gray dust from their shoulders. The mother picks up the heavy leather suitcase and takes her daughter's hand. When they unbar the heavy wooden door and climb the stairs, they do not find the world exactly as they left it. The gray light of dawn is struggling to push through a thick, yellow haze of smoke. The air smells sharply of ash, shattered stone, and burning timber. Down the street, a familiar bakery has been reduced to a pile of smoldering rubble. The mother stands on the threshold of her building. Fine flakes of white ash are falling gently from the sky, drifting down to the pavement like warm, terrible snow. She looks down at her daughter, whose face is smudged with cellar dirt, but whose eyes are calm, still resting safely inside the magical forest of the whispered story. The mother takes a deep, ragged breath of the smoky air. Her home still stands. Her child is alive. The sky is broken, and the empire is burning, but they have survived the night. She squeezes her daughter's hand, a quiet, desperate promise of endurance, and they step out into the ashes together, ready to face the long, uncertain morning. There is a heavy, rhythmic sorrow in the sound of boots that only know how to walk backward. For years, the map of the empire was a living, breathing thing that only ever grew. It was drawn in bold, sweeping strokes, pushing outward across rivers, across plains, and across vast, burning deserts. The people of the homeland had been told a beautiful, comforting story. They were told that their continent was a magnificent, impenetrable fortress, ringed in iron and guarded by the sea. They were told that the storm of the war would always remain over the horizon, far away from their quiet valleys and their ancient, sleeping towns. But maps are only made of paper. And paper, no matter how grandly it is painted, will eventually tear when the rain begins to fall. The rain is falling now, heavy and cold, over the rugged, ancient mountains of Italy. The warm, golden shores of the southern sea have been left far behind, swallowed by the rising tide of a world that has finally arrived at the gates. The soft underbelly of the grand fortress has been pierced, and the illusion of invincibility is slowly, painfully unraveling among the ancient olive groves and the steep, stony terraces. Here, the war is not fought in sweeping, horizontal lines. It is a grueling, vertical world. It is a landscape of jagged peaks, deep, shadow-filled ravines, and narrow goat paths carved into the side of the earth centuries ago. The soldiers who navigate this vertical maze do not look like the pristine, confident marchers of the early parades. They are ghosts wrapped in wet wool. Their uniforms are caked in a thick, gray mud that seems to seep into the very pores of their skin. Their boots, once polished to a mirror shine, are now heavy, shapeless blocks of wet leather, gripping desperately at the slippery stones. To fight in these mountains is to fight a war against gravity itself, and the greatest enemy is not the distant artillery, but the sheer, bone-deep exhaustion of the climb. But there is a heavier weight pulling at these men than the mud on their boots. It is the profound, weary realization of what this marching truly means. They are no longer conquerors taking new land. They are caretakers of a slow, inevitable defeat. Their days are spent digging deep trenches into the rocky soil, fighting fiercely for a single, windswept ridge, only to receive the quiet order in the middle of the night to pack their gear and fall back to the next mountain, just a few miles to the north. It is an organized retreat, mathematically precise and tactically sound, but to the human heart, it is a devastating, repeating loop of surrender. Every step backward is a mile of earth handed over. Every river they cross in the dark is a river they know they will never see again. They are unspooling the grand tapestry of the empire, pulling it apart thread by thread, mountain by mountain. Imagine a young soldier, his shoulders aching from the heavy canvas straps of his pack, seeking shelter from the endless, driving rain. He finds a small, abandoned stone farmhouse clinging to the side of a deep gorge. The roof is made of curved terracotta tiles, ancient and weathered, overgrown with soft green moss. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of damp earth, old hay, and the faint, lingering memory of wood smoke. He slips inside, closing the heavy wooden door against the howling wind. The silence of the barn is a sudden, beautiful shock. He drops his pack to the floor and leans against the rough stone wall, sliding down until he is sitting in the dark. He pulls off his helmet, running a trembling, dirt-stained hand through his wet hair. For a moment, he simply listens to the rain drumming against the roof tiles above him. It is a soothing, rhythmic sound, a gentle lullaby that tries to wash away the harsh, metallic noises of the day. In the dim, gray light filtering through a crack in the shutters, he reaches into his tunic. He pulls out a letter, carefully wrapped in a piece of oiled canvas to protect it from the damp. It is from his father, written from their quiet home in a valley far to the north. His father writes of the apple trees in their garden, noting how heavy the branches are with fruit this year. He writes of the changing leaves, the quiet autumn mornings, and the wood he is chopping for the winter fire. The young soldier reads the words, but they do not bring him the comfort they once did. Instead, they bring a sudden, chilling clarity. When he was fighting in the vast, distant steppes, his home felt like a beautiful dream, safely tucked away in another universe. But now, sitting in this Italian barn, looking at his compass, he realizes the terrifying truth. Every time he takes a step backward, he is bringing the war one step closer to that garden. The impenetrable fortress is shrinking. The grand map is curling inward, its edges burning away, and the distance between the front line and his own front door is vanishing with every ridge they surrender. He is no longer fighting for the glory of an expanding world. He is using his own tired body as a fragile, human shield, trying to buy just one more quiet autumn morning for the people he loves. He folds the letter, his heart heavy with a protective, melancholy sorrow, and tucks it back against his chest. Outside the barn, the war continues its slow, grinding march. The paths are clogged not just with weary men, but with the quiet, tragic victims of the tearing map. Local villagers, wrapped in dark shawls, push wooden carts piled high with whatever they could carry, a few blankets, a copper cooking pot, a framed photograph of a saint. They walk alongside the retreating soldiers, sharing the same mud, the same freezing rain, the same profound displacement. A German soldier, standing by the edge of the path while a column of supply mules trudges past, catches the eye of an old Italian woman struggling to keep her footing on the slick stones. She is small, her face deeply lined by decades of working in the sun. She looks at him, not with hatred, but with a deep, shared exhaustion. They do not share a language. The grand politics that placed them on this muddy road mean absolutely nothing here. Without a word, the soldier steps forward. He reaches out and gently takes the heavy wooden handle of her cart, helping her push it over a jagged rut in the path. When they reach level ground, she stops. She reaches into her deep apron pocket and pulls out a single, roasted chestnut. It is cold, and blackened by the fire, but it is all she has. She presses it into the soldier's large, mud-caked hand. He bows his head slightly, a quiet, unspoken thank you. It is a fleeting, beautiful moment of grace, two human beings offering each other a tiny spark of warmth in a world that has gone entirely cold. As the sun begins to set, hiding behind the thick, bruised clouds, the order comes down the line once again. It is time to move. The soldiers rise from their resting places. They shoulder their heavy rifles and step back out into the rain. Before they leave the valley, there is a grim, heartbreaking task to perform. Down by the river, engineers are placing charges beneath a beautiful, ancient stone bridge. It is a bridge that has stood for hundreds of years, carrying generations of farmers, lovers, and children across the rushing water. The men watch from the ridge above. There is a sudden, blinding flash of light, followed by a deep, hollow boom that echoes endlessly through the mountain peaks. The center of the bridge crumbles, falling into the gorge with a graceful, tragic finality. The water below swallows the stones, and the connection to the south is severed. The soldiers turn away, their faces perfectly still. They do not cheer. They do not celebrate the destruction. They feel a heavy, settling sadness, knowing that they are tearing up the very roots of the world just to slow down a clock that cannot be stopped. They are burning the map behind them, leaving nothing but broken stone and rising water in their wake. The night falls completely, wrapping the Apennine Mountains in a thick, impenetrable fog. The fog is a blessing and a curse. It hides them from the eyes in the sky, offering a brief, peaceful cloak of invisibility, but it also isolates them. In the thick, white mist, a man can only see the back of the soldier walking directly in front of him. They become a silent line of ghosts, tethered together by nothing but the rhythm of their boots and the shared weight of their retreat. They walk northward, always northward. The compass needle points toward the homeland, drawing them closer to the very valleys they are trying to protect. The grand, soaring eagles of the empire have been brought down to the mud, reduced to tired, shivering men who just want to find a dry place to sleep. As you lie in the quiet dark, imagine the gentle, steady sound of the rain falling on those ancient mountain stones. Let the heavy, weary rhythm of those retreating boots fade away into the distance, replaced by the soft, soothing whisper of the wind through the pines. The map is tearing, the grand illusions are fading into the mist, and all that is left is the quiet, human endurance of simply walking through the night. Close your eyes, let the heavy weight of the day slip from your shoulders, and rest safely in the knowledge that, for now, the marching has stopped, and the world is finally still. There is a unique, heavy kind of silence that settles over the world just before a long-expected storm finally decides to break the horizon. For years, the edge of the continent had been a place of endless, breathless waiting. The vast coastline, where the green fields of France gently spill into the gray, restless waters of the English Channel, had been transformed into a quiet, concrete frontier. The men stationed here called it a wall, but to the soldiers standing watch in the damp, salt-stained darkness, it felt less like a fortress and more like the very edge of the earth. They were standing on the lip of a massive, dark ocean, staring out into the mist, listening to the waves, and waiting for the phantom giant they knew was out there. It is the deep, quiet hour of the morning, long before the sun even thinks to rise. The weather has been terrible for days. A heavy, churning storm has been lashing the coast, driving the rain sideways against the thick concrete of the bunkers. The wind howls a mournful, continuous note through the narrow viewing slits, bringing with it the sharp, biting chill of the sea. Inside one of these heavy concrete rooms, the air is entirely different. It is thick and still, smelling of wet wool, stale tobacco, and the faint, metallic scent of cold rifle oil. A single, shielded lantern casts a weak, amber glow across the rough walls, illuminating the faces of the men who keep the watch. They are a portrait of an empire that has exhausted its youth and its strength. There are no parade ground soldiers here, no bright-eyed conquerors dreaming of glory. The men in this bunker are a quiet mixture of the very old and the very young. There is a veteran of the eastern steppes, a man whose hair has turned entirely silver, his face deeply lined by the freezing winters and the endless retreats. He sits quietly on a wooden stool, his heavy hands resting on his knees, his eyes closed as he listens to the rhythm of the rain. Beside him sits a boy. He is so young his uniform seems to swallow him whole. His cheeks are smooth, untouched by a razor, and his eyes are wide, darting nervously toward the dark slit facing the sea every time the wind suddenly shifts. He is a child placed at the edge of the world, asked to hold back the ocean with a rifle he barely knows how to hold. The older man opens his eyes. He sees the boy's trembling hands. Without a word, he reaches over to a small, iron stove ticking gently in the corner. He pours a cup of hot, thin chicory coffee from a battered tin pot and offers it to the boy. The ceramic mug is warm, and the boy wraps his cold fingers around it, drawing the heat into his palms. The older man offers a small, gentle smile. It is a quiet promise of protection, a silent reassurance that says, "I am here. You are not alone in the dark." The boy takes a sip, the bitter liquid warming his chest. He sets the mug down on a wooden crate and pulls a piece of folded paper from his tunic. It is a letter to his mother. He has been writing it in small, careful increments over the past few days, resting the paper against his knee whenever he has a quiet moment. He does not write about the heavy, suffocating dread of the waiting. He does not tell her that he stares at the dark water until his eyes ache, imagining shapes in the fog. Instead, he writes about the ocean. He is from a small, landlocked farming village, and the sea is a profound, terrifying marvel to him. He tells his mother about the tides. He writes about how the water retreats so far across the sand, only to return again, steady and faithful, every single day. He tells her about the sea glass he found on the beach, smoothed and frosted by the waves, and how he has kept a beautiful, pale green piece in his pocket for luck. He writes that the sound of the waves is sometimes like a lullaby, and that he closes his eyes and pretends it is the wind blowing through the tall wheat fields behind their house. He pours his gentle innocence into the letter, creating a safe, quiet space on the paper where the war cannot reach them. He folds it carefully, smoothing the crease with his thumb, and places it back into his pocket, close to his beating heart. Outside, the storm is finally beginning to break. The relentless pounding of the rain softens into a delicate, misty drizzle. The wind, which had been tearing at the coast for days, drops into a slow, gentle breeze. The heavy, dark clouds above begin to fracture, revealing the faint, bruised purple of the pre-dawn sky. The boy steps up to the narrow viewing slit, peering out into the gloom. The world outside is a canvas of deep grays and blues. The tide is low, exposing a vast, flat expanse of wet, shining sand that mirrors the pale light of the sky. The sea is surprisingly calm now, rolling in with a gentle, shushing sound that belies the violence of the days before. It feels peaceful. It feels almost normal. But then, the atmosphere shifts. It does not begin with a sight. It begins with a feeling. The older veteran suddenly stands up, the wooden stool scraping softly against the concrete floor. He does not look out the window. He looks down at his own hands. He feels a vibration. It is a low, deep, subaudible hum that seems to travel not through the air, but through the very bedrock of the earth. It is a sensation more than a sound, a trembling in the concrete walls, a slight shiver in the surface of the coffee left in the tin cup. The boy feels it too. He places his hand against the cold, damp wall of the bunker, feeling the tremor moving through the stone. The older man steps up to the viewing slit, standing shoulder to shoulder with the boy. They look out into the lifting mist, out over the dark water. Slowly, the fog begins to peel back, dissolving into thin, white ribbons over the waves. The horizon, which for years had been nothing but a sharp, empty line dividing the gray water from the gray sky, is entirely gone. In its place is a jagged, impossible silhouette. As the pale light of the dawn stretches across the channel, the true, staggering scale of the vision reveals itself. The ocean is no longer an ocean. It is a city of steel. From the leftmost edge of their vision to the furthest point on the right, the water is entirely covered by ships. There are massive, dark hulls of battleships resting heavy and deep in the water, their giant guns pointing silently toward the shore. There are countless smaller vessels, a vast, swarming constellation of metal and canvas, bobbing gently on the swells. The sky above them is dotted with the strange, floating shapes of tethered balloons, swaying like slow, silent phantoms in the morning breeze. It is the giant from across the sea, finally awake, finally arrived on their doorstep. The invisible weight of the endless factories, the unyielding hum of the distant assembly lines, the sheer, unimaginable material wealth of the waking world, it has all materialized right in front of their eyes. In the bunker, there is no shouting. There is no frantic rush for the alarms. There is only a profound, heavy silence. The boy drops his binoculars, letting them hang from the leather strap around his neck. His mouth is slightly open, his breath catching in his throat. He is not looking at an army. He is looking at the entire world, gathered on the water, coming to wash away the crumbling fortress of his leaders. It is a sight so terrifyingly massive, so completely beyond human comprehension, that it bypasses fear entirely and lands squarely in the realm of absolute awe. The older veteran lets out a long, slow breath. The breath turns to white vapor in the damp air and vanishes. He has fought across continents. He has seen the map tear and fold. He has known, in his heart of hearts, that this day was coming. And now that it is here, the heavy burden of the waiting is suddenly lifted from his shoulders. It is a moment of quiet, beautiful resignation. The illusion is over. The grand speeches, the propaganda, the promises of an impenetrable wall, they all evaporate into the morning mist, entirely meaningless against the staggering, physical reality of the armada filling the horizon. He turns to the young boy. He does not offer him a rifle. He does not shout a command. He simply reaches out and places a heavy, warm hand on the boy's trembling shoulder. He gives it a firm, reassuring squeeze. It is a gesture that says, "Look at it. Look at the size of the world. We are just men. We have done all we can do." The boy looks up at the older man, his eyes shining with unshed tears in the dim light. He reaches into his pocket, touching the folded letter to his mother, and the small, smooth piece of sea glass resting beside it. He holds onto these fragile pieces of love and home, anchoring himself in the storm that is about to break. The dawn finally, fully arrives. The sun begins to push its way through the breaking clouds, casting long, golden rays of light across the English Channel. The light catches the metal hulls of the thousands of ships, turning the dark armada into a glittering, moving ocean of silver. It is a terrible, magnificent dawn. The sentries in the bunker do not move. They stand together in the cold concrete, bathed in the soft morning light filtering through the slit. They watch the inevitable approach, feeling the slow, heavy turn of history beneath their boots. The war has finally crossed the water. The long night of waiting is over. As you picture them there, standing in the quiet moments before the storm, let the deep, resonant hum of the ships fade away into the gentle sound of the waves lapping against the shore. Let the immense weight of that morning settle into a soft, peaceful stillness. The tide comes in, the tide goes out, and the small, fragile light of human connection continues to burn, even when the horizon is entirely filled with steel. Sleep now, and let the long-awaited dawn bring the quiet peace of knowing that the waiting, at last, is done. There is a strange, quiet heaviness that fills the air when the horizon begins to walk toward your own front door. For so long, the people of the homeland had lived in the vast, insulated center of a seemingly endless world. The war was a distant echo, a story told in the newspapers, a line drawn on a map that always pointed outward, pushing further and further into the unknown. The borders of the empire had stretched so wide that they felt like fiction, safely separating the quiet, cobblestone streets from the thunder of the front lines. But now, the grand illusion is unwinding. The map is no longer stretching. It is curling inward, its edges burning away, pulling the vastness of the world right into the center of the living room. To step outside into the cool, evening air is to feel a profound and unsettling change. You can stand in the middle of a wide, open meadow, beneath a canopy of endless stars, and still feel an overwhelming sense of claustrophobia. The sky seems to hang just a little bit lower. The air feels dense, thick with a breathless anticipation. It is a shrinking world. The vast oceans of space that once protected them are evaporating, mile by mile, day by day, leaving only a narrow island of familiar Earth surrounded by a rising, unstoppable tide. Listen to the wind. In the past, the wind only carried the scent of pine needles, the smell of baking bread from the village square, or the gentle promise of rain. But now, the wind has changed its voice. If you turn your face to the east, the breeze carries a low, constant, rhythmic vibration. It is a deep, earth-shaking rumble, so distant it feels like a memory of a storm, yet so steady it rattles the teacups in the china cabinet. If you turn your face to the west, there is another sound. A heavy, mechanical hum, a low drone that vibrates through the floorboards and settles into the bones. The east and the west are pressing inward. The two distant edges of the world are folding together, and the people find themselves caught in the quiet, shrinking space in between. In a small, lamplit study on the second floor of a quiet house, an elderly schoolteacher stands before a large paper map pinned to his wall. For years, he has followed the grand announcements on the radio, marking the vast advances with small, brightly colored pens. His map was a tapestry of outward motion. But tonight, the room is completely silent. He reaches up with trembling, age-spotted hands, and he begins to pull the pens out. He removes the pens from the distant snows. He removes them from the warm, southern coasts. He removes them from the deep forests and the wide, golden plains. He pulls them back, moving them closer and closer to the center, until they are all clustered tightly around his own small region, crowding each other, with nowhere left to go. He stares at the paper. The grand empire he was told to believe in has vanished, replaced by a tiny, fragile circle of remaining earth. He does not feel anger. He only feels a deep, profound weariness. He gently pulls the thumbtacks from the corners of the map. He lets the heavy paper roll itself up, a soft, dry rustling sound in the quiet room. He ties it with a piece of twine and places it in the back of his wooden desk. The grand geography is gone. All that remains is the street outside his window, the neighbors he has known his whole life, and the quiet dignity of waiting for the inevitable. As the ring closes, the physical world begins to crowd into the center. The quiet country roads, once empty save for the occasional farmer's cart, are now choked with the slow, melancholic movement of displacement. Families who lived on the edges of the map have been pushed inward by the advancing tides. They walk with their heads bowed, pushing wheelbarrows piled high with whatever pieces of their lives they could carry, a bundle of woolen blankets, a copper kettle, a wooden clock wrapped in a winter coat. They are strangers, but they are bound together by the same suffocating reality. They are seeking the safety of the middle, only to find that the middle is rapidly disappearing. In a village square, bathed in the soft, bruised light of dusk, a mother opens the heavy oak door of her home. She stands on the threshold, wiping her hands on her faded apron. The world outside her door is chaotic, filled with the exhausted faces of travelers seeking shelter from the damp night air. Her own pantry is nearly bare. The shelves that once held jars of preserves and sacks of flour are mostly empty, offering only a few wrinkled potatoes and a small tin of dried tea leaves. But as she looks at a family huddled on the stone steps across the street, a mother holding a shivering child, a grandfather leaning heavily on a wooden cane, the grand politics of the falling empire fade into complete insignificance. The world is ending, the borders are collapsing, but human kindness refuses to be extinguished. She steps out into the cool evening. She crosses the cobblestones and places a gentle hand on the other mother's shoulder. She does not ask where they are from or what side of the map they used to live on. She simply says, in a soft, steady voice, "Come inside. The wind is cold, and I have water on the stove." Inside her kitchen, the encroaching darkness is kept at bay by the warm, orange glow of the hearth. She pours the hot, weak tea into chipped porcelain cups. The strangers wrap their cold, trembling fingers around the warm ceramic, closing their eyes as the steam rises to their faces. In this small room, the suffocating pressure of the closing ring is temporarily lifted. The outside world is falling apart, the horizons are vanishing, but here, in the glow of the fire, there is a sanctuary of quiet heroism. It is the profound, beautiful resilience of sharing the very last of what you have, simply because another human being is cold. This shrinking world alters everything it touches, even the invisible airwaves that float above their rooftops. In the late hours of the night, a father sits in his dark living room, the only light coming from the warm, amber dial of the wooden radio cabinet. He slowly turns the heavy plastic knob, searching through the static. Once, this dial connected him to a vast, sprawling network of local stations playing familiar waltzes and reading the daily news. But now, as he turns the knob, the airwaves themselves have become a map of the closing ring. He hears a voice speaking English, clear and strong, no longer a faint whisper skipping across an ocean, but broadcasting from a transmitter just a few towns away. He turns the dial a fraction of an inch and hears the sharp, rhythmic cadence of Russian, broadcasting from the forests just to the east. The foreign voices are no longer distant ghosts, they are pressing against the glass of his own windows. The world has become impossibly small. He turns the radio off, letting the heavy, breathless silence of the room wash over him, listening only to the slow, steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, counting down the hours of an era coming to an end. And what of the men who stand on the edges of this shrinking circle? Deep in a dark, ancient pine forest, the air smells of damp moss, wet bark, and the sharp, metallic tang of cold steel. A young soldier sits at the base of a massive tree, his knees pulled up to his chest, his thick woolen coat pulled tightly around his shoulders to ward off the biting chill. He has spent years marching outward, constantly moving away from the hearth he loved. He has walked across deserts and snowfields, always chasing a horizon that receded before him. But now, the momentum has entirely reversed. He is falling back. Day by day, tree by tree, ridge by ridge, he is being pushed closer to home. It is a terrifying thing to know that the enemy is walking toward your own doorstep. But sitting here in the quiet dark of the forest, listening to the wind sighing through the pine needles, the young soldier feels a strange, contradictory emotion blooming in his chest. It is a quiet, secret relief. The endless, exhausting journey into the unknown is over. He is no longer walking away. He is finally walking back. The vast, terrifying distances that separated him from his family have been swallowed by the closing ring. The front line and his front porch are slowly becoming the exact same place. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, worn notebook and a stub of a pencil. He wants to write to his wife. He knows, with absolute certainty, that the letter will never be delivered. The blue postal boxes in the towns are overflowing with envelopes that no one comes to collect. The trains no longer run. The roads are cut. The lines of communication have been severed by the tightening noose. But he writes anyway. He writes because the act of forming her name on the paper is a tether to his own humanity. He rests the paper against his knee in the dim moonlight. He does not write about the shrinking map, or the sound of the approaching tracks, or the heavy feeling of claustrophobia in the air. He writes about the quiet things. He writes about the way the morning light used to catch the dust motes in their bedroom. He writes about the smell of the rain on their small garden. My dearest, he writes, his hand moving slowly, deliberately. The world has become so very small, but my love for you fills every inch of it. I do not know what tomorrow will bring. The woods are dark, and the wind is loud. But please know that every step I take now is a step toward you. I am coming home. Wait for me in the quiet moments. He tears the page from the notebook, folds it into a small, perfect square, and tucks it safely into his breast pocket, right over his heart. It is a tiny, fragile monument to love, carried in the center of a collapsing universe. As the night deepens over the continent, the feeling of the closing ring settles into a profound, gentle stillness. The frantic, breathless panic of the early retreat has completely exhausted itself. The people are too tired to run, and there is nowhere left to run to anyway. They simply wait. They wait in their cellars, they wait in their kitchens, they wait in the dark forests. They listen to the east wind and the west wind, feeling the two great storms merging into one. The map has curled completely inward, burning away the illusions of empire, the arrogance of conquest, and the grand, empty promises of the past. All that is left in the center of the ring is the purest, most essential core of the human spirit. It is the quiet dignity of a mother sharing her last cup of tea. It is the gentle resignation of an old man folding away a useless map. It is the brave, unspoken love of a soldier writing a letter to a ghost. Let the heavy, suffocating weight of the world outside gently slip away. Let the borders dissolve, and the distant thunders fade into a soft, meaningless hum. Here, in the quiet center, there is only the steady, rhythmic beating of the heart, the warmth of a shared blanket, and the peaceful surrender to the end of a very long journey. Close your eyes, breathe in the stillness of the shrinking night, and let the gentle dark wrap around you, keeping you safe until the morning finally comes. There is a terrible, fragile beauty in the way a deep winter fog can hide the truth of a dying world. Step with me into the ancient, silent woods. It is the very heart of winter, and the great forests of the West are caught in a slumber so deep it feels as though the earth itself has stopped turning. The tall, dark pines stand like quiet sentinels, their heavy branches bowing under the weight of a brilliant, undisturbed snow. A thick, white mist weaves through the tree trunks, swallowing the sound of the world, creating a muffled, dreamlike sanctuary. It is a landscape of profound, breathtaking peace. But beneath the frost, hidden within the beautiful, blinding white of the woods, a dying beast is gathering its strength for one final, desperate breath. The grand machinery of the empire, once so loud and arrogant, has been pushed back to the very edges of its homeland. The maps have curled inward, the factories are tired, and the warm summers of easy victories are nothing but a distant, fading memory. The leaders in their distant, heated bunkers have drawn new arrows on the paper, pointing them back into the snowy forests. They have promised a miracle. They have commanded the exhausted remnants of their world to rise up, to push through the winter, and to turn back the overwhelming tide. It is an illusion, crafted from pure desperation, built on a foundation of snow. To understand the heartbreaking tragedy of this winter mirage, you must look closely at the figures moving quietly through the freezing fog. They are not the seasoned, broad-shouldered men who marched across the continent years ago. The empire has consumed its men. Instead, look at the boy standing guard beside a frozen stream. He is 16 years old. A few months ago, he was sitting at a wooden desk in a quiet classroom, learning mathematics and reading poetry. Now, he is wrapped in a coat that is far too large for his narrow frame. It is a coat made of thin, rough fibers, spun from recycled cloth and wood pulp, entirely incapable of holding back the biting, damp chill of the forest. The steel helmet sits heavily on his head, casting a dark shadow over a face that is smooth, pale, and incredibly tired. He is holding a rifle that feels heavier with every passing hour, his unloved fingers raw and stiff from the cold. He does not feel like a conqueror. He feels like a ghost, wandering through a frozen purgatory, waiting for a dawn that refuses to arrive. He knows the truth. All the boys know the truth. They have seen the empty shelves in their mothers' kitchens. They have seen the rubble of their cities. They know that this grand, sudden push into the forest is not the beginning of a victory, but the final, exhausting gasp of a world that is already lost. Yet, they walk forward. They walk because they are told to, because they are bound by a tragic, quiet obedience, and because it is simply too cold to stand still. In this beautiful, freezing desolation, the smallest moments of human connection become the only things that truly matter. Down in a shallow snow trench, dug hastily into the roots of a giant oak tree, two figures huddle together for warmth. One is a young boy, his teeth chattering uncontrollably, his thin boots soaked through with icy water. The other is a veteran, an older man whose face carries the deep, quiet scars of 100 different battles. He has survived the burning sands and the endless eastern ice, and now he finds himself back where he started, surrounded by children in the snow. The older man looks at the shivering boy. He does not offer him a speech about glory or destiny. He knows those words are entirely hollow here. Instead, he reaches into his own pack and pulls out a pair of dry, woolen socks. He had been saving them, guarding them like a precious treasure against the wet and the cold. Without a word, he gently takes the boy's frozen foot, helps him remove the soaked, rigid leather boot, and slides the dry, warm wool over his toes. The boy looks up, his eyes shining with unshed tears in the dim, gray light. "Thank you," he whispers, his voice trembling. The older man just nods, a small, sad smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Keep your feet moving," he murmurs softly. "Just keep moving. We will rest soon." It is a microscopic act of grace in a vast, dark forest. It is a quiet, paternal love that transcends the uniforms and the orders. In the face of a terrifying, impossible task, this small transfer of warmth is the purest form of heroism. It is the quiet resilience of the human heart, refusing to freeze completely, even when surrounded by absolute winter. When the order finally comes to advance, there are no loud bugles, no cheering lines of men. There is only the soft, rhythmic crunch of thousands of boots stepping into the deep, dry snow. They move like phantoms through the mist, their breath rising in pale, white plumes before them. The heavy iron machines that accompany them groan and cough in the freezing air, their treads slipping on the ice, struggling to pull their own weight through the drifts. The forest is so quiet, so deeply asleep, that the intrusion of this weary army feels like a heavy, unnatural dream. As they push deeper into the woods, the boys find themselves surrounded by the strange, surreal artifacts of a world they are trying to reclaim. They pass abandoned, snow-covered jeeps. They find wooden crates filled with strange, exotic treasures left behind by the retreating enemy, tins of rich meat, packets of real coffee, and bars of sweet chocolate. A group of teenagers pauses beside one of these crates. They pry it open with numb fingers. They do not cheer at the discovery, they only stare in quiet, melancholic awe. They share a piece of the chocolate, letting the sweet, rich flavor melt on their dry tongues. It is a taste of the waking world, a reminder of the sheer, impossible abundance of the giant they are trying to fight. Eating the chocolate does not make them feel stronger. It only deepens their quiet despair. It is a soft, devastating proof that the illusion they are marching for is fragile, and the reality of the endless ocean of supplies against them is absolute. Night falls over the forest like a heavy, dark curtain. The temperature drops so low that the trees themselves seem to crack and groan in the cold. The boys are ordered to halt. They drop their heavy packs into the snow, too exhausted to even dig proper shelters. They sit at the base of the towering pines, wrapping themselves in whatever thin blankets they possess, pressing shoulder to share the faint, fading heat of their bodies. In the pitch black of the forest, a boy turns on a small, shaded flashlight. The weak, yellow beam illuminates a crumpled piece of paper resting on his knee. He holds a pencil in his stiff, awkward hand. He wants to write a letter home, to anchor his soul to the warm kitchen he left behind before the winter swallows him whole. But the words are so hard to find. How can he describe this beautiful, terrifying white world? How can he tell his parents that he is walking through a fairy tale that has turned to ice? He decides to protect them, just as they tried to protect him when he was a child. He writes carefully, ensuring his handwriting does not betray his shivering. "Dear mother, dear father," he writes. The forest here is very quiet. The snow on the branches looks just like the pictures in the old storybooks we used to read by the fire. I am wearing the scarf you knitted for me, mother, and it keeps the wind away perfectly. We are moving forward, and the officers say we are doing well. Please do not worry for me. I think of you both every time I see a star shining through the trees. I hope the dog is keeping your feet warm at night. He folds the letter, sealing a universe of unspoken fear and profound love into the delicate paper. He slips it into his tunic, resting it against his chest, hoping that his own heartbeat will keep the ink from freezing. He turns off the flashlight, plunging himself back into the velvety dark of the woods. For a few days, the heavy weather acts as their silent protector. The fog and the endless snowstorms ground the great, roaring plains of the enemy, keeping the sky closed and the illusion alive. The boys march through the valleys, taking small villages, warming their hands by the fires of abandoned hearths, almost allowing themselves to believe the impossible promise of the dying beast. But illusions, no matter how desperately they are held, are destined to melt. It happens early one morning. The wind, which had been blowing a fierce, blinding snow for days, suddenly stops. The heavy, gray canopy of clouds begins to thin, tearing apart like old cotton. A young soldier, leaning against a snow-covered fence post, looks up. Through the breaking clouds, he sees a patch of sky. It is a brilliant, piercing, beautiful shade of blue. It is the most terrifying thing he has ever seen. The other boys look up, too. The silence of the forest is profound, but it is a brief, fragile silence. Slowly, at first, and then with a growing, inescapable intensity, a new sound fills the cold air. It is the deep, synchronized drone of hundreds of heavy engines. The giant in the sky has awakened. The weather has broken, the shield is gone, and the true, devastating reality of the world has returned. As the shadows of the plain sweep across the white snow, the illusion of the winter offensive simply shatters. The grand arrows on the maps mean nothing anymore. The desperate, final breath has been exhaled, leaving the beast completely hollow. There is no panic among the boys. There is no frantic running. They are too tired for fear. The exhaustion has reached a depth where it touches a strange, settling peace. They realize that they cannot push back the ocean. They cannot fight the sky. The order comes to halt, and then, the inevitable, familiar order to turn back. The boys do not complain. They turn around, their boots finding the deep, heavy tracks they made just days before. The retreat is slow, methodical, and profoundly sad. They are leaving behind the borrowed time, stepping out of the dream and back into the cold, hard reality of the closing ring. As the sun begins to set, casting long, violet shadows across the snow, the boys find a quiet clearing to rest. They sit in the snow, leaning against the ancient, indifferent trees. The roar of the war feels distant now, muffled once again by the sheer vastness of the woods. The young boy with the oversized coat closes his eyes. The cold no longer bites at his skin, it has become a heavy, numbing blanket, inviting him to sleep. He thinks of the letter in his pocket. He thinks of the warm kitchen, the smell of baking bread, the sound of his mother's voice. In the quiet theater of his mind, the war does not exist. There is only the gentle, falling snow, wrapping the world in a soft, forgiving white. Let the silence of the winter forest wash over you. The long, exhausting march of the illusion is over. The heavy burdens of the map, the grand speeches, and the impossible expectations have all been laid to rest in the snow. All that remains is the quiet, rhythmic breathing of tired souls finally allowed to stop walking. Close your eyes, feel the deep, still peace of the snow-covered pines, and let the gentle, cold night carry you away into a quiet, undisturbed slumber. The beast is resting, the woods are still, and you are entirely safe in the dark. There is a sound the ice makes when it finally surrenders to the sun, a soft, yielding crack that whispers the end of the long, dark winter. For months, the world had been locked in a paralyzing frost. The earth had been as hard as iron, entirely unforgiving, trapping the tired men in a silent, freezing purgatory. But the earth, in her infinite and gentle wisdom, always remembers how to turn toward the light. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the bitter winds begin to soften. The heavy, gray skies fracture, allowing pale, golden rays of sunlight to touch the snow. And as the snow begins to melt, the world begins to weep, sending thousands of tiny, trickling streams down through the forests and the valleys, all making their way toward the deep, ancient rivers of the homeland. Spring is arriving, bringing with it the damp, sweet smell of thawed earth and the promise of a quiet rebirth. But for the men standing on the western edge of their crumbling world, this spring brings something far heavier than the changing of the seasons. They are standing on the banks of the great river. This river is not just a body of water. In the hearts and the songs of the people, it is a myth. It is the great, flowing wall that has divided the continent for centuries. It is the final, undeniable threshold of the home. For the soldiers who have walked backward across deserts, across mountains, and through the freezing forests, this river was the line they promised themselves they would never cross. It was the ultimate barrier, the place where the retreating must finally stop. But as they stand on the muddy banks, looking out at the wide, rushing water, the grand illusions of the empire finally wash away entirely. The men who guard this ancient water do not look like the invincible guardians of a fortress. They are so profoundly tired that their exhaustion has become a physical weight, bowing their shoulders and slowing their steps. Their uniforms are patched and threadbare, stained with the mud of 100 different retreats. They lean on their rifles not as weapons of conquest, but as simple walking sticks, desperately trying to keep themselves upright in the softening earth. Look closely at one of these men. He is sitting on a damp, mossy stone near the water's edge. He is older, a watchmaker perhaps, a man who spent his life tending to the delicate, orderly ticking of tiny gears. Now, his hands are calloused and dark with grime. He takes off his heavy steel helmet, resting it in the soft spring grass beside him. He reaches down and dips his bare hands into the cold, rushing river. He brings the water to his face, washing away the dust of the long roads, washing away the soot of the burning world. The water is freezing, born from the melting snows of the distant mountains, but it feels like a profound, holy absolution. He closes his eyes and lets the water drip from his chin. For a fleeting moment, listening to the gentle, rhythmic lapping of the current against the stones, the war does not exist. There is only the river, ancient and indifferent, flowing exactly as it did 1,000 years ago, and exactly as it will 1,000 years from now. Beside him in the mud, pushing its way bravely through the tangled roots of a willow tree, is a single, tiny snowdrop. Its delicate white petals are entirely untouched by the violence of the world. The man looks at this tiny flower, and a sudden, overwhelming realization settles into his chest. The earth is waking up. The winter is over. And he wants to live to see the summer. For years, he and his comrades had been trapped in a state of suspended animation, holding their breath, waiting for the end. They had accepted that they might simply fade into the snow. But the spring has brought a cruel and beautiful awakening. The warm air reminds them of the gardens they left behind. The smell of the damp soil makes them ache for the feeling of a plow in their hands. The final barrier of the river is not just a physical line on a map, it is the emotional dam holding back a vast, heartbreaking ocean of homesickness. And then, the quiet morning is broken. The sound does not come as a terrifying roar. It comes as a steady, mechanical hum from the opposite bank. Through the morning mist, the shapes begin to form. The boats. The endless, unstoppable tide of the world, finally arriving at the very edge of the sanctuary. The grand leaders in their distant, dark bunkers had commanded that the river must be held at all costs. They had demanded that the water run red before a single boot touched the eastern shore. They spoke of glorious, final stands, of a nation rising up to push the ocean back. But down here, in the mud and the gentle spring mist, the grand speeches fall entirely flat. They are nothing but empty air against the sheer, physical reality of the armada crossing the water. The watchmaker looks at the boats emerging from the fog. He looks at his rifle, resting against his knee. It is a heavy, rusted piece of iron that has brought him nothing but sorrow. He looks at the young boy standing a few paces away, a teenager holding a weapon with trembling hands, his eyes wide with a quiet, suffocating fear. The older man stands up. He does not raise his voice. He does not issue a command. He simply reaches out, gently places his hand over the barrel of the boy's rifle, and slowly pushes it down until the metal touches the earth. He looks into the boy's eyes, offering a soft, deeply peaceful smile. "It is over," he whispers. "We do not have to carry this anymore." All along the riverbank, this quiet, invisible wave of surrender ripples through the mist. It is not an act of cowardice. It is an act of profound, heartbreaking humanity. The men realize that to fire their weapons now is simply to throw stones at a rising tide. The barrier has been broken, the homeland is open, but in that shattering realization, there is a strange, overwhelming relief. The worst has finally happened, and yet, the sky has not fallen. The soldiers begin to lay down their arms. You can hear the soft, metallic clatter of rifles being dropped into the spring mud, a sound that carries the weight of a million unsaid prayers. They take off their heavy ammunition belts, letting them slide from their weary shoulders. The sudden lightness is dizzying. Without the heavy iron of the war pulling them down, they feel as though they might simply float away into the morning air. They sit down on the grass. They lean against the trunks of the ancient trees. They watch the boats arrive not as conquerors, but as the final, definitive end to their long nightmare. The tension that had kept their shoulders tight for years suddenly snaps, leaving them entirely hollow, entirely at peace. When the first soldiers from across the sea step onto the muddy banks, there is no grand clash. There is a tense, surreal silence. The advancing men hold their weapons high, expecting the fierce, desperate resistance they had been promised. Instead, they find ghosts sitting in the grass, warming their faces in the pale sunlight. An Allied soldier, his uniform dry and impossibly new, walks slowly toward the watchmaker. The two men look at each other. They are separated by language, by uniforms, by an ocean of terrible history. But beneath the steel helmets, they are just tired men who want to go home. The watchmaker reaches slowly into his tunic. The Allied soldier tenses, his finger resting on the trigger. But the watchmaker only pulls out a small, battered silver tin. He opens it, revealing a few dry, crumbled pieces of tobacco. He looks at the younger man, gesturing gently to the tin. The Allied soldier lowers his weapon. He reaches into his own webbing and pulls out a pristine, white paper cigarette. He offers it to the old man. He produces a silver lighter, the flame flaring bright in the gray morning. The watchmaker leans forward, lighting the cigarette, closing his eyes as he takes a deep, soothing breath. He nods his head in a quiet, profound gesture of thanks. In that tiny, fragile exchange of smoke and silence, the war simply evaporates. The grand, terrifying empire is gone, reduced to a group of weary men sharing a quiet moment by the water's edge. As the day stretches on, the crossing continues. The bridgeheads are secured, the heavy machinery rolls past, and the noise of the advancing world moves deeper into the heartland. But for the men sitting by the river, left behind under the watch of their new captors, the war has ceased to be a reality. It has become a memory. The watchmaker sits with his back against a tree, his legs stretched out in front of him. He pulls a folded, blank piece of paper from his pocket. He has carried this paper for months, saving it for a moment just like this. He finds his small, dull pencil. He writes a letter to his wife. He does not write about the crossing of the river, or the sound of the boats, or the heavy boots of the enemy on their soil. He writes about the future. "My darling," he writes, his hand moving with a newfound, beautiful steadiness. The long night has finally broken. I am sitting by the water, and the sun is warm on my face. You will not believe it, but I saw a snowdrop blooming in the mud today. The fighting is done. I am safe. I am finally, truly safe. I will be coming home to you. Please, open the windows and let the spring air into the house. The winter is over. He folds the letter, smiling. For the first time in years, he is not writing a goodbye. He is writing a promise. He looks around at his fellow soldiers. Some are sleeping, their heads resting on their knees, catching the first truly peaceful rest they have known in years. Others are talking quietly, their voices soft and melodic, stripped of the harsh, frantic edge of survival. They are no longer a machine of war. They are a collection of fathers, brothers, and sons, slowly remembering how to simply be human. The river flows on beside them, carrying the melted snows toward the sea. The water washes over the discarded rifles, slowly burying the heavy iron in the soft, forgiving silt. The earth is already beginning the long, slow work of healing. The crossing of the Rhine was the physical breaking of the final wall, but in the hearts of the men who laid down their arms, it was the beautiful, emotional breaking of a terrible spell. The grand illusion of endless conflict was shattered by the simple, undeniable truth of the spring. The world does not want to fight forever. It wants to grow. It wants to rest. As you lie in the quiet comfort of your own room, imagine the gentle, soothing sound of that great river flowing past the muddy banks. Let the rushing water carry away the heavy, rusted burdens of the day. Feel the tension leaving your shoulders, just as the weary soldiers felt the crushing weight of the war slip from their hands. There is a time for marching, and there is a time to simply put down the heavy things you have been carrying. The barrier has been crossed. The fighting is done. Breathe in the soft, sweet air of the thawing earth, close your eyes, and let the gentle, peaceful rivers of spring carry you safely into the quiet of the night. There is a particular kind of heartbreak in turning the lock on your own front door for the very last time, knowing the heavy iron key resting in your pocket has just become a memory. For generations, the vast, rolling farmlands of the East had been a place of quiet, deep-rooted peace. Families lived in the same sturdy stone and timber houses that their great-grandparents had built. They knew the exact floorboard that creaked at the top of the stairs, the way the afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window to warm the wooden table, and the precise smell of the damp earth in their own gardens when the spring rains finally arrived. Their lives were tied to the soil, measured not by the grand, sweeping events of the world, but by the gentle turning of the seasons, the planting of the wheat, and the harvesting of the apples. But the world outside their windows has changed. The wind blowing from the east no longer carries the scent of pine and snow. It carries a low, ceaseless rumble, a heavy vibration that rattles the china plates in the cupboards and causes the water in the drinking glasses to tremble. The storm that began years ago, a storm built on arrogance and endless expansion, has finally turned back upon the people who were promised it would never touch them. The great, invisible map of the empire has collapsed entirely, and the front line is no longer a distant place in a newspaper. It is the tree line at the edge of the village. It is the dead of winter, and the snow lies deep and heavy across the frozen fields. In the quiet hours before dawn, a profound, solemn exodus begins. Inside a farmhouse, the rooms are lit only by the warm, flickering glow of a few remaining candles. A mother stands in the center of her living room, looking at the life she is about to leave behind. She cannot take the heavy oak wardrobe. She cannot take the grandfather clock that has counted the hours of her entire life. The space in the wooden cart outside is so impossibly small. She must distill an entire lifetime down to a few fragile necessities. She packs thick woolen blankets, loaves of dense, dark bread baked just hours before, and a small sack of potatoes. But the true weight of her cargo is not measured in food or warmth. From the mantel, she takes a small, framed photograph of her husband, a man who marched away into the vastness of the war and never returned. She wraps it carefully in a soft piece of linen. She takes a small, wooden music box that belonged to her grandmother. She is packing not just to survive the cold, but to save the very soul of her family. Outside, the breath of the farm horses blooms into the freezing air like thick, white clouds. The animals stand patiently, their heads bowed, their thick winter coats dusted with frost. They are hitched to a wooden wagon, its bed covered by a canvas arch to keep the snow away. The father of the house, an old man whose hands are worn smooth from decades of working the plow, gently pats the broad neck of his oldest mare. He whispers softly to her, a quiet apology for asking her to pull such a heavy burden into the dark. The mother wraps her two young children in layer upon layer of knitted sweaters, scarves, and heavy coats, until they look like tiny, round bundles of wool. She lifts them into the back of the wagon, tucking them deep beneath the blankets, creating a small, warm nest among the sacks of flour and the few salvaged belongings. She climbs up beside them, pulling the canvas down to block the biting wind. With a soft cluck of the tongue and a gentle shake of the leather reins, the wooden wheels creak, groan, and slowly begin to turn, cutting deep, dark tracks into the pristine snow. They are not alone. As they pull out onto the narrow country road, they join a vast, silent river of humanity. For as far as the eye can see, a slow-moving procession of horse-drawn carts and weary people stretches toward the western horizon. It is a migration of millions, an entire civilization uprooted and set adrift on a frozen ocean of white. The cold here is not simply a temperature. It is a living, breathing presence. It bites at the cheeks, it numbs the fingers, and it demands every ounce of energy just to keep the blood moving. Yet, in the face of this terrifying, beautiful desolation, the people do not panic. The grand, frantic energy of the falling empire is entirely absent on this road. In its place is a quiet, staggering resilience. They endure the unendurable through the simple, heroic act of putting one foot in front of the other. In the back of the wagon, beneath the canvas roof, the mother creates a sanctuary of love. The air is freezing, but she pulls the children close to her chest, sharing the vital, beating warmth of her own heart. When her youngest daughter begins to cry, frightened by the creaking of the wood and the strange, endless swaying of the cart, the mother does not show her own fear. Instead, she leans down, resting her cheek against the child's warm forehead, and begins to tell a story. She speaks in a low, soothing whisper. She tells a tale of a brave little bird flying through a winter storm, searching for a beautiful, hidden valley, where the sun always shines and the trees are full of sweet berries. Her voice is a gentle, steady melody that flows over the harsh, rhythmic crunching of the wheels on the ice. She spins a protective web of imagination, keeping the darkness of the world firmly outside the canvas. The child's breathing slows, matching the calm rhythm of her mother's voice, until she finally drifts into a peaceful, sheltered sleep. Days blur into nights, and the journey becomes an endless tapestry of white fields and gray skies. The snow continues to fall, a soft, silent dusting that covers the landscape, slowly burying the homes and the villages they left behind, turning their past into a perfect, undisturbed blank page. In this moving city of refugees, the smallest moments of kindness become monumental acts of grace. During a brief halt at a frozen crossroads, an elderly woman sits alone on a small wooden sled, her hands tucked deep into a worn muff. She has no horses, only her own tired legs to pull her few belongings. A farmer, walking beside his heavily laden wagon, sees her shivering. He does not have much space. His own wagon is full of his children and his surviving neighbors. But he stops. He reaches into the back of his cart and pulls out a thick, heavy sheepskin blanket. He walks over to the old woman and gently drapes it over her frail shoulders, tucking it in around her neck to keep the draft away. He does not ask for anything in return. He only offers a soft, tired smile, a silent acknowledgement that in this frozen wilderness, they are all responsible for one another. The old woman touches his hand, a fleeting, profound connection of shared humanity. It is a tiny spark of warmth, glowing brilliantly against the vast, cold indifference of the winter. When the evening finally comes, the procession halts for the night. The wagons are drawn together in tight circles, offering whatever small shelter they can against the wind. Tiny, fragile fires are coaxed to life in the snow, fed by whatever scraps of wood can be spared. The people gather around these small, orange flames. They hold their tin cups of melted snow and weak, roasted grain coffee, letting the steam warm their numb faces. They do not talk of the approaching storm, or the grand armies, or the leaders who abandoned them to the ice. They talk of the simple things. They remember the taste of the summer strawberries in their gardens. They talk of the songs they used to sing at the harvest festivals. They hold onto these memories tightly, using them as a shield against the vast, terrifying unknown that lies before them. Beside one of these fading fires, a teenage girl sits with a small, leather-bound journal resting on her knees. The firelight dances across the pages as she dips a metal pen into a small bottle of ink she has kept warm in her pocket all day. She writes not to record the history of a falling nation, but to preserve the quiet poetry of her own heart. The snow is so deep today, she writes, her handwriting elegant and slow. It covers everything, making the world look so soft and quiet. I miss my room. I miss the window that looked out over the birch trees. But tonight, sitting by the fire, I looked up at the sky. The stars are so incredibly bright here, scattered like crushed glass across the dark. Mother says that as long as we are together, we carry our home with us. I think she is right. The wooden wagon is cold, but when we huddle together under the blankets, I feel safe. We are walking into a blank horizon, but we are walking together. She blows softly on the ink to dry it, closes the journal, and tucks it safely away. She is a refugee, displaced and stripped of her material world, but her spirit remains entirely unbroken. She is finding beauty in the stars, finding home in the warmth of her family, and stepping bravely into the unknown with a quiet, enduring grace. As the fires burn down to soft, glowing embers, the camp falls into a deep, exhausted silence. The horses sleep standing up, their heads drooping low, their warm breath rising gently into the night. Inside the wagons, families curl together, an intricate knot of arms and blankets, sleeping deeply despite the cold. The approaching storm continues its slow, inevitable march across the continent, but here, in the snow, it feels very far away. The people have left the grand, crumbling stage of the war. They have stepped off the map and into the timeless, quiet endurance of simply being human. They have lost their houses, but they have not lost themselves. Listen to the gentle, rhythmic sigh of the winter wind moving through the frozen trees. It is a soothing, ancient sound, a lullaby from the earth herself, whispering that even the longest journey will eventually find a place to rest. The snow falls softly, covering the tracks, wrapping the sleeping wagons in a beautiful, peaceful white blanket. Let your own mind drift away with the falling snow. Leave the heavy burdens of the day behind, just as they left the heavy wooden furniture in their abandoned homes. Close your eyes, breathe in the cool, still air of the quiet night, and know that you, too, are entirely safe, entirely warm, and ready to rest. There is a strange and heavy comfort in the steady, mechanical hum of a ventilation fan, spinning endlessly to breathe life into a tomb of solid concrete. Far below the shattered streets of the capital, beneath the ancient, broken trees of the garden, the world has been reduced to a narrow labyrinth of damp, gray corridors. Up above, the sky is no longer a sky. It has become a swirling, suffocating canopy of smoke and falling ash. The great, historic buildings that once projected the endless pride of an empire are slowly crumbling into dust, their facades weeping stone and shattered glass onto the empty avenues. The sun has been entirely obscured, leaving the city in a permanent, bruised twilight. But down here, buried beneath layers of reinforced steel and heavy earth, the sun is nothing but a memory. The bunker is a surreal, subterranean capsule, entirely disconnected from the dying world above. It is bathed in the harsh, unwavering glare of electric bulbs that cast long, unnatural shadows against the pale walls. There is no morning here, and there is no night. Time has lost its gentle, natural rhythm, replaced by the relentless ticking of clocks on the walls and the constant, vibrating thud of the artillery exploding far overhead. With every distant impact, a fine, ghostly rain of concrete dust drifts down from the low ceilings, settling onto the shoulders of the people who walk these narrow halls. In the center of this underground maze, behind a heavy wooden door, the final, quiet madness of the empire is playing out on the surface of a wooden table. A large, beautifully printed map is spread across the wood, its corners held down by heavy brass weights. The men who stand around this table do not look like the conquerors they once claimed to be. Their faces are gaunt, their eyes shadowed with a profound, unshakable exhaustion. They speak in hushed, urgent whispers, their fingers trembling slightly as they reach for colored pencils. With precise, careful strokes, they draw bold arrows across the paper. They move small, wooden blocks from one side of a printed river to another. They speak of divisions, of counterattacks, of sweeping maneuvers that will break the siege and push the enemy back. But the armies they are moving do not exist. They are moving ghosts. The divisions they speak of with such desperate, practiced authority are nothing more than a handful of exhausted, freezing men huddled in the ruins of the suburbs, armed with empty rifles and broken hearts. The grand armor they command on the paper is already resting silently in the ash, its engines cold, its tracks broken. It is a tragic, breathtaking absurdity. The leaders have retreated so far into the earth, and so far into their own illusions, that the paper map has become their only reality. They are fighting a phantom war in a sealed room, completely deaf to the agonizing, physical collapse of the city just a few dozen feet above their heads. They shuffle the colored pencils, entirely consumed by the desperate choreography of a dance that ended long ago. But step away from the map room. Step out into the narrow, dimly lit hallway, where the true, heartbreaking story of the bunker unfolds among the ordinary souls trapped in the dark. Here, you will find the secretaries, the telephonists, the medical orderlies, and the guards. They are the quiet machinery of this buried world, ordinary people who have been pulled down into the shadows to witness the end of an era. They are so incredibly tired. Their skin has taken on the pale, translucent quality of parchment, untouched by the sun for weeks. The air they breathe is stale and metallic, smelling faintly of ozone, old sweat, and the bitter tang of anxiety. At a small metal desk tucked into an alcove, a young typist sits with her hands resting on the keys of a heavy, black typewriter. She is barely 20 years old. Her hair, once carefully curled and pinned, falls loosely around her face. She stares blankly at the white sheet of paper rolled into the carriage, the typed letters blurring together in her exhausted vision. She listens to the muffled, rhythmic thud of the bombs above. With every shake of the earth, the small desk lamp flickers, and the keys of the typewriter rattle softly against one another. She is terrified, but it is a quiet, internalized terror. It is the heavy, suffocating dread of knowing that the heavy steel doors that protect them are also the doors that seal them inside. Yet, even in this surreal, claustrophobic nightmare, the gentle resilience of the human spirit refuses to be entirely extinguished. Down the hall, an older orderly walks slowly toward her desk. He carries a small, silver tray. On the tray rests a porcelain teacup, its edges slightly chipped, filled with hot water and a precious, hoarded spoonful of real tea leaves. He has saved these leaves for weeks, keeping them wrapped in a piece of wax paper in his pocket, waiting for a moment when the darkness simply became too heavy to bear. He stops at the young typist's desk. He does not say a word. He simply places the saucer gently next to her typewriter. She looks up, her tired eyes widening slightly at the sight of the steam rising from the cup. She looks at the older man. He offers her a small, incredibly tender smile. It is a smile that holds a universe of unspoken understanding. It says, "I know you are frightened. I know we are in the dark. But for this one moment, let the warmth comfort you." She reaches out with trembling fingers and wraps her hands around the warm porcelain. The heat seeps into her palms, a tiny, brilliant spark of life in the cold, gray room. She brings the cup to her lips and breathes in the faint, floral scent of the tea. For just a few seconds, the smell transports her out of the bunker. She is back in her mother's kitchen, the windows open to the spring breeze, the sunlight pooling on the wooden floor. She whispers a soft, fragile thank you. The orderly nods, gently touches her shoulder, and walks quietly back down the hall, disappearing into the shadows. It is a microscopic moment of kindness, an everyday heroism that stands in stark, beautiful contrast to the sweeping, destructive madness of the map room. They are entirely powerless to stop the collapse of the world, but they still have the power to offer each other a cup of warm tea. Setting the empty cup aside, the young typist reaches into the bottom drawer of her desk. She pulls out a piece of her own personal stationery, its edges soft and slightly worn. She finds her favorite fountain pen, uncaps it, and rests the nib against the paper. She wants to write a letter to her parents, who fled to a small village in the southern mountains months ago. She knows there is no mail leaving the city. She knows that the couriers have stopped running, and that the roads are completely cut. This letter will never see the light of day. It will likely turn to ash, just like the city above. But she writes it anyway. The act of writing is a tether, a way to anchor her drifting soul to the people she loves. She does not write about the bunker. She does not tell them about the pale faces, the shaking walls, or the men moving imaginary armies on the wooden table. She does not want to burden her parents with the terrifying reality of her final days. She wants to leave them with a beautiful fiction, a protective blanket of love. My dearest mother and father, she writes, her handwriting forming neat, elegant loops on the page. I am thinking of you tonight. I hope the weather in the mountains has turned warm, and that the wildflowers are beginning to bloom along the paths we used to walk. Please do not worry about me. I am safe here. It is quiet, and the people are kind to me. I close my eyes and I can see the garden so clearly. I can smell the earth after the rain. She pauses, listening to the heavy drone of the ventilation fans. The floor trembles again, sending a few more grains of concrete dust drifting down onto her paper. She brushes the dust away with the side of her hand and continues. I want you to know that I am not afraid. I carry your love with me, and it keeps me entirely warm. Whatever happens, please promise me that you will sit in the sun, that you will listen to the birds, and that you will remember the happy days we shared. I love you both, more than the words can say. She signs her name, blowing softly on the wet ink. She folds the paper carefully, creating a perfect, crisp crease. She seals it inside an envelope, writing their names on the front. She places the envelope into her coat pocket, pressing her hand against it, feeling a profound, settling peace wash over her exhausted mind. The letter is a monument to quiet courage. Surrounded by the absolute failure of an empire, surrounded by the arrogant, tragic delusions of men who refuse to see the truth, this young woman has created a tiny, indestructible sanctuary of love. As the hours blur together, the energy in the bunker begins to shift. The frantic, whispered conversations in the corridors begin to die down. The typists lean their heads back against their chairs, closing their eyes. The orderlies sit on the cold floor, wrapping their arms around their knees. The realization that the end is finally here does not bring panic, it brings a strange, heavy relief. The long, agonizing wait is almost over. The burden of the empire is finally slipping from their shoulders. They no longer have to pretend. They no longer have to push back the inevitable. In the map room, the colored pencils are finally laid down. The men stare at the paper, the silence between them growing thick and profound. The illusion has completely fractured, and there is nowhere left to hide. The tragedy is complete, but in its completion, there is a finality that feels almost like peace. Above them, the city continues to burn, the ash falling softly, burying the empty streets in a deep, gray blanket. But the fire cannot burn forever. Eventually, the flames will exhaust themselves. The smoke will clear. The sun will return to warm the broken stones, and the earth will begin the slow, patient work of healing. Down in the dark, the people of the bunker surrender to the quiet. The ventilation fan hums its steady, hypnotic lullaby. The young typist rests her head on her desk, her hand resting over the pocket that holds her letter. She lets the heavy, pulling tide of sleep wash over her, carrying her away from the damp concrete, away from the shadows, and back to the bright, sunlit garden of her memories. Let the heavy weight of the world above fade entirely away. The madness is contained, the maps are folded, and the quiet night has come to claim its own. Close your eyes, breathe in the soft, steady rhythm of the stillness, and let the gentle, sheltering dark keep you entirely safe and entirely at peace. There is a silence so profound that it rings in the ears, a sudden, heavy stillness that is far more startling than any thunder. For years, The continent had been trapped in a terrifying, mechanical symphony. It was a world entirely defined by noise. There was the rhythmic, marching beat of boots on cobblestones, the deafening roar of engines turning in the sky, the wailing of sirens in the dead of night, and the low, endless thud of artillery that vibrated through the very bedrock of the earth. The people had forgotten what it meant to live without this heavy, acoustic blanket. They had learned to sleep through the trembling of the floorboards, and to speak in voices raised just enough to carry over the constant hum of the war. But then, on a mild, gentle day in the heart of spring, the great, grinding machine of the empire simply runs out of breath, and stops. The paper is signed in a room far away, but the ink does not make a sound. Instead, the surrender travels like an invisible, breathless wave across the ruined landscape. It moves through the shattered forests, over the rubble of the ancient cities, and across the quiet, flowing rivers. And wherever this wave passes, it extinguishes the noise. Imagine a young German soldier, sitting in a shallow, muddy trench at the edge of a pine forest. He has spent the last 3 years of his life braced for the dawn. The morning has always been the most dangerous time, the hour when the shadows lift and the distant guns begin their terrible, waking chorus. He sits with his knees pulled to his chest, his hands gripping his heavy, rusted rifle so tightly that his knuckles are entirely white. His uniform is worn, damp with the morning dew, and his eyes are closed in quiet, exhausted anticipation. He waits for the whistle. He waits for the earth to shake. The sun slowly crests the horizon, casting long, golden beams of light through the trunks of the pines. The light touches his face, warming his pale, dirt-streaked skin. The minutes stretch on. The air grows warmer. And then, he hears a sound that makes his breath catch in his throat. It is the bright, clear, delicate trill of a songbird. The bird is perched on a broken branch just a few yards away, singing a joyful, intricate melody into the crisp morning air. The young soldier opens his eyes. He looks at the bird, and then he looks out at the empty, quiet field before him. There is no smoke. There is no shouting. There is only the wind rustling the tops of the trees and the sweet, melodic singing of the bird. The realization does not hit him with a sudden, joyful rush. It comes slowly, washing over him like a heavy, warm wave of disbelief. He slowly, carefully opens his hands. He lets the heavy iron rifle slip from his grasp. It falls into the soft earth with a dull thud, a piece of metal that has instantly lost all of its terrible meaning. He reaches up with trembling fingers and unclips the leather strap of his steel helmet. He lifts it from his head, feeling the cool spring breeze move through his damp hair. He does not cheer. He is far too tired to cheer. He simply leans his head back against the muddy wall of the trench, closes his eyes, and begins to weep. They are not tears of sorrow, nor are they tears of triumph. They are the tears of a profound, bewildering exhaustion. He has survived. The long, dark nightmare has evaporated into the morning mist, leaving him sitting in a quiet forest, alive. Miles away, in the heart of a shattered city, this same heavy silence is seeping down into the dark. Beneath the ruins of a brick apartment building, a mother sits in a crowded cellar. For weeks, this damp, subterranean room has been her entire universe. The people here have lived in a state of suspended terror, listening to the world ending above their heads. But today, the dust falling from the wooden rafters has settled. The terrifying drone of the bombers has vanished from the sky. A neighbor, an old man with a heavy cane, slowly unbars the thick wooden door that leads up to the street. It creaks loudly on its iron hinges, breaking the silence of the cellar. The mother pulls her thick shawl tightly around her shoulders and takes her young daughter's hand. Together, they walk up the narrow, concrete steps, moving toward the pale rectangle of daylight. When they step out onto the street, they are entirely blinded for a moment. They raise their hands to shield their eyes from the brilliant, unclouded sun. As their vision clears, they look upon a landscape of total devastation. The buildings they once knew are gone, reduced to jagged teeth of stone and vast, sprawling mountains of ash. But as they look up, they realize the sky is entirely empty. It is a beautiful, piercing, endless blue. There are no contrails, no tethered balloons, no falling shadows. The mother takes a deep, hesitant breath. The air still smells of crushed brick and old smoke, but beneath the ruin, there is something else. There is the faint, sweet scent of the spring soil turning over. There is the smell of the damp river. She looks down at her daughter, whose face is covered in cellar dust. The mother kneels down on the broken cobblestones. She uses the edge of her apron to gently wipe the dirt from her child's cheek. She pulls the little girl into a tight, fierce embrace, burying her face in the child's shoulder. The crushing, suffocating weight of protecting her daughter from the falling sky is suddenly lifted. The mother breathes out a long, shuddering sigh, feeling the tension drain from her shoulders, leaving her weak and trembling in the sunlight. They are standing in the ruins of an empire, but in the warmth of the spring sun, they are entirely, beautifully free. As the day stretches on, the strangest, most surreal scenes begin to unfold across the newly quiet continent. The sharp, violent lines that divided the world for so many years simply dissolve into the dust. Down a rubble-strewn street, a column of Allied tanks rolls slowly forward. But their guns are lowered, and the hatches are open. The soldiers sitting on the steel hulls look out at the weary, displaced civilians lining the roads. There is no conquering arrogance in their eyes, only the same shared, hollow fatigue. An American soldier, his uniform covered in road dust, catches the eye of an elderly German man standing by a broken lamppost. The old man looks incredibly frail, his hands resting on a small, wooden pushcart that holds his remaining possessions. The young soldier reaches into his canvas bag and pulls out a small, round tin of fruit. Without a word, he tosses it gently through the air. The old man catches it against his chest. They look at each other across the few feet of space. They do not speak each other's language. But the hatred, the grand ideologies, the terrifying propaganda that had kept them enemies for so long, has completely vanished. It evaporated the moment the gun stopped. The old man nods his head in a quiet, solemn gesture of thanks. The young soldier nods back, and the tank rolls slowly on. It is a tiny, fleeting moment, but it is the beginning of the world remembering how to be human again. In a quiet holding camp near the edge of a green valley, the surrendered soldiers have laid down their arms. They sit in the tall grass, their tunics unbuttoned in the warm afternoon air. A soldier, who had carried the heavy burden of the retreat for hundreds of miles, sits with a small piece of paper resting on his knee. He has found a stub of a pencil in the bottom of his pack. For years, his letters home were filled with careful fictions, designed to protect his family from the horrors he was witnessing. He wrote about the stars, about the snow, about anything other than the truth. But today, the truth is the most beautiful thing in the world. His hand shakes as he brings the pencil to the paper. The adrenaline that kept him moving for so long has completely abandoned him, leaving his fingers clumsy and weak. He takes a deep breath, steadying his hand, and begins to write. "My dearest," he writes, the words flowing with a desperate, joyful urgency. "The guns have stopped. The sky is quiet, and the war is over. I am sitting in the grass, and I am watching the clouds move across the valley. I cannot believe it is true, but it is. I am alive. I am safe. I am coming home to you." He pauses, a single tear falling from his eyelashes to land on the corner of the paper, blurring the blue ink. "I do not know how long it will take to walk back to our door," he continues. "The roads are broken, and I am very tired. But I want you to open the windows. I want you to shake the dust from the rugs. Put the kettle on the stove. I will walk every hour of the day until I am standing in our kitchen again. Wait for me in the quiet." He folds the letter, pressing it to his lips. It is no longer a message in a bottle cast into a dark ocean. It is a promise, anchored in the firm, peaceful reality of the spring. As the afternoon turns to evening, a new, gentle ritual takes place in the broken towns and villages. For years, the setting of the sun was a time of fear. It meant pulling the heavy, black curtains across the windows, hiding every spark of light from the eyes in the sky. It meant sitting in the dark, waiting for the sirens. But tonight, the people approach their windows with a strange, hesitant wonder. In a small cottage that survived the bombing, an old woman reaches up and unhooks the heavy blackout cloth from the window frame. She pulls it down, letting it fall to the floor in a dark heap. She strikes a match and lights a thick wax candle, placing it right on the windowsill. The small, orange flame flickers, casting a warm glow out into the twilight. It is a tiny beacon of defiance, a quiet celebration of peace. All down the street, in the windows of the surviving homes, other candles begin to appear. The street is bathed in a soft, flickering starlight, entirely unafraid of the dark. The people sit by their windows, watching the light. The bewildering exhaustion is settling deep into their bones, wrapping them in a heavy, comforting embrace. The grand, terrifying beast of the empire has finally breathed its last. The maps are meaningless, the banners are torn, and the arrogant dreams of endless conquest have been swept away by the wind. All that is left is the quiet, beautiful truth of survival. They have made it through the long night. The earth is still here, the rivers are still flowing, and the spring is waiting to help them rebuild. Listen to the absolute stillness of the evening air. Let the silence of the guns wash over you, soothing away the heavy burdens of the day. The noise has stopped. The danger has passed. Close your eyes, feel the deep, settling peace of a world that is finally allowed to rest, and let the gentle, quiet night carry you into the deepest, most beautiful sleep you have ever known. When the heavy, blinding fog of a long storm finally rolls away, the morning light does not always bring a sudden joy. Sometimes, it only asks us to look quietly at what the wind has broken. The guns have stopped. The deafening, mechanical roar that consumed the continent has faded into a profound and hollow silence. But as the smoke of the battlefields begins to thin, drifting lazily into the spring sky, it pulls back the curtain on the deepest, most terrible secret of the fallen empire. This is the moment the map is fully unrolled, not to show shifting borders or conquered lands, but to reveal the dark, aching scars carved into the very soul of the earth. Walk with a young soldier, a boy who has carried his heavy pack across an ocean and through the mud of 100 ruined towns. He has seen the violence of men fighting men. He has seen the rubble of falling cities. But today, the dirt road leads him away from the battlefield and into a quiet forest. The trees here are tall and ancient, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. And yet, the air is perfectly, unnaturally still. There are no birds singing in these woods. He walks through a gate of rusted iron. He does not find an army waiting for him. He finds a silence so heavy it presses against his chest, making it difficult to draw a breath. He steps onto earth that is mixed with a fine, pale, gray dust. It is the ash of innocent dreams, of quiet lives, of millions of gentle hearts that were swallowed by a machine built entirely of hatred. The soldier stops. He lets his rifle hang loosely from his shoulder, a useless piece of iron in a place that requires only a weeping heart. He takes off his heavy helmet, the cool air touching his damp forehead, and he simply bears witness. He looks at the rows of wooden barracks, decaying and frail. He looks at the hollowed, beautiful eyes of the people who have survived the darkest, coldest night in human history. They are wrapped in thin rags, their bodies fragile like dry autumn leaves, their voices reduced to the softest, most delicate whispers. The young soldier does not know their language. He does not know the names of the quiet villages they were taken from, or the lullabies they once sang to their children before the shadows came. But human sorrow needs no translation. He reaches into his canvas pack. His hands are trembling. He pulls out a thick, woolen blanket, woven in a warm mill thousands of miles away, and steps slowly forward. He moves with an infinite, heartbreaking gentleness, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter the fragile air. He drapes the warm wool over the shoulders of an elderly man standing in the gray dust. The old man looks up. His eyes hold the weight of 1,000 lifetimes, a deep, unfathomable well of grief and endurance. Slowly, weakly, he raises a hand and rests it over the soldier's young hand. It is a touch as light as a feather, but it carries the profound, earth-shattering weight of a return to humanity. In that silent, shared gaze, the invisible walls of the arrogant empire crumble into absolute nothingness. There are no conquerors here. There are only broken people, holding onto each other in the ruins, crying silent, warm tears that wash the gray ash from their cheeks. Miles away, beyond the barbed wire and the quiet woods, the people of the homeland are also waking up. For years, they had lived inside a carefully crafted, comfortable illusion. They had listened to the soaring, triumphant music on the radio, they had watched the grand parades, and they had closed their eyes to the shadows growing just beyond the edges of their pristine streets. They had told themselves that the ash falling on their gardens in the winter was only snow, or the harmless debris of distant, busy factories. But the fog is lifting for them, too. The doors of the secret places are thrown open, and the undeniable truth of what their empire was truly built upon spills out into the harsh, unforgiving daylight. A mother stands in her cobblestone square, holding a newspaper printed by the arriving armies. The pages are filled with photographs, stark and unsparing. She looks at the images of the camps, at the sheer, overwhelming scale of the cruelty. The paper trembles in her hands. The proud, arrogant dream of the state shatters entirely in her mind, leaving behind a cold, nauseating reality. The triumphs they were promised were entirely hollow, hollowed out by the profound, devastating cost of their own silence. She lowers the paper and looks at the hands of her neighbors passing by. They are ordinary hands, hands that baked bread, hands that mended clothes, hands that tended roses and held children. How, she wonders in the quiet agony of her own heart, did these same hands build such a terrifying, merciless machine? A heavy, suffocating mourning settles over the surviving rooftops. It is not just a mourning for the lost war, or the ruined cities, or the sons who will not return. It is a deep, spiritual grief for the loss of their own innocence. It is a quiet, devastating realization that they had allowed a dark, consuming hatred to take root in the soil of their own home, and that the stain of it will outlast them all. In the quiet hours of the evening, as the sun dips below the tree line and paints the sky in soft shades of bruised purple and faded gold, the young soldier sits on the wooden steps of a barrack. The camp is quiet now. The survivors have been fed warm soup, wrapped in clean wool, and gently laid to rest in soft beds. The soldier pulls a small, worn notebook from his breast pocket. He needs to write to his family, to reach across the ocean and touch the safe, unbroken world he left behind. But the words are so incredibly heavy. My dearest family, he writes, his pencil moving slowly, pressing deeply into the paper. Today, the fighting ended for me, but a different kind of sorrow has taken its place. I have seen things that the human heart was never meant to hold. We walked into a place where the light had been completely forgotten. I cannot describe the shadows to you, and I do not want to bring them into our warm home. He stops, wiping a single, silent tear from his own cheek with the back of his hand. But I also saw a miracle today, he continues, his handwriting softening into gentle, rolling loops. I saw a woman, who had lost absolutely everything, reach into her ragged pocket and share a tiny, crumbled piece of bread with a child who was not her own. In the very center of the deepest darkness, they kept a tiny, defiant spark of love alive. It is the most beautiful, heartbreaking courage I will ever know. Please, when you read this, go out into the yard. Touch the green grass. Feel the sun on your face. We must promise to always protect the light. We must never, ever forget the shadows we saw today. He folds the letter, sealing his quiet tears into the envelope. It is a letter not of victory, but of bearing witness. It is a solemn oath, carried on paper, to remember the fragile, beautiful value of every single beating heart. The awakening is a painful, grueling dawn. It forces the world to look into a mirror and see the terrifying capacity for cruelty that slumbers within the human soul if it is left unguarded. The ruins left behind are not just broken bricks and shattered stone bridges. They are millions of empty chairs at dinner tables. They are millions of unwritten letters, millions of unplayed songs, millions of gentle futures turned to smoke and scattered on the indifferent wind. But as the long night finally gives way to the morning, there is a gentle, abiding stillness that follows. The machinery of hatred has been dismantled, its heavy iron gears rusted and broken in the mud. The camps stand empty, silent monuments to the tears that watered the earth. Listen to the wind as it moves through the empty wire. It no longer carries the sorrow of the innocent or the harsh, barking orders of the guards. It is just the wind, soft and natural, blowing across a healing landscape. The earth, with her infinite, quiet patience, is already beginning to pull the green moss over the gray stones. The scars will remain forever, a quiet, eternal reminder carved into the skin of the world. But the fog has lifted. The truth is known. And in the quiet, somber spaces left behind, the very first, tentative seeds of a new empathy are being planted in the ash. Let the heavy sorrow of the day slowly drift away. Breathe in the quiet, clear air of a world that has finally opened its eyes. The shadows have been exposed to the light, and they can no longer hide in the dark. Rest now, with a gentle, vigilant heart, knowing that the dawn has come, and the long, terrible storm has finally passed into memory. There is a profound and gentle patience in the earth, a quiet understanding that even the heaviest, most shattered stone must eventually make way for the softest blade of grass. The great, terrible storm has finally passed. The deafening roar of the engines, the heavy, rhythmic thud of the marching boots, the wailing of the midnight sirens, they have all evaporated into the vast, empty sky. In their place, a new sound has settled over the scarred and broken continent. It is the sound of absolute, breathtaking silence. It is a stillness so deep and so heavy that it feels almost like a warm blanket, wrapping itself around the jagged edges of the ruined cities and the quiet, empty fields. The long night of the empire has ended, not with a triumphant chorus, but with the soft, weary exhale of a world that is finally allowed to rest. When the people slowly emerge from their dark cellars and underground shelters, they step out into a landscape that is entirely unrecognizable. The grand, arrogant architecture of the past has been reduced to rolling mountains of gray rubble. The streets they once walked, the bakeries where they bought their morning bread, the schools where their children sang, they are all gone, swallowed by an endless sea of pulverized brick, twisted iron, and pale, ghostly ash. But as they stand in the quiet sunlight, blinking against the bright, unclouded day, there is no frantic panic. The energy for fear has been completely exhausted. Instead, there is a strange, settling peace. The worst has happened. The sky has fallen, the map has burned, and yet, they are still here. Their hearts are still beating. The air they breathe, though smelling faintly of old smoke and damp plaster, is theirs once again. And so, in the quiet aftermath, the slow, heartbreaking, and incredibly beautiful task of living begins again. It does not begin with grand speeches or the redrawing of borders. It begins with a single pair of hands reaching down into the dust. Look at the women of the ruined cities. They are mothers, grandmothers, and daughters, wrapped in faded shawls and oversized coats. They step into the mountains of rubble with nothing but small chisels, wooden mallets, and their own bare, calloused hands. They form long, quiet lines down the center of the shattered streets. Watch as an older woman, her hair tied back in a patterned scarf, picks up a single, blackened brick from the ruins of what used to be a grand library. The brick is covered in hard, gray mortar. She sits on an overturned wooden crate and places the brick in her lap. With a gentle, rhythmic tapping, she uses her small hammer to chip the old mortar away. Chink! 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 It is a slow, methodical sound. It is not the loud, destructive crash of the war, but the quiet, persistent heartbeat of a new beginning. When the brick is clean, she brushes the red dust from its surface with her thumb. She turns to the woman standing next to her and passes the brick into her hands. That woman passes it to the next, and the next, a silent, flowing river of human resilience. Slowly, brick by salvaged brick, they build neat, orderly stacks on the edge of the cleared pavement. They are not thinking of rebuilding an empire. They are thinking of building a wall to keep the winter wind out. They are thinking of a small hearth to boil water. They are reclaiming their world, piece by tiny piece, from the ashes of a tragic mistake. In this landscape of gray and brown, the smallest remnants of the past become miraculous, glowing treasures. Deep in the rubble of an apartment building, a young woman is digging carefully with a piece of scrap wood. Her hands are coated in pale dust, her fingernails cracked and worn. Suddenly, her makeshift shovel hits something soft. She drops the wood and uses her fingers to gently brush away the plaster and ash. She uncovers a small, wooden music box. It is scuffed, its painted lid scorched by the fires, but it is whole. She lifts it from the dirt as if it were made of spun gold. With trembling fingers, she turns the small metal key on the bottom. She holds her breath. From the burned wooden box, a delicate, tinkling melody begins to play. The sound is impossibly clear, a fragile, silver thread of music cutting through the heavy silence of the ruins. The woman closes her eyes, and a single, warm tear slips down her dusty cheek. It is a tear of profound, overwhelming relief. The war could destroy the stone, it could shatter the glass, but it could not silence the gentle music of her memories. She presses the box to her chest, holding onto it as a promise that beauty still exists, hiding quietly beneath the broken things, waiting to be found. As the days turn into weeks, the rhythm of the clearing becomes a meditation. The people do not speak much as they work. They are lost in their own thoughts, processing the vast, incomprehensible grief of the years before. But they are no longer alone. They are bound together by the shared dust on their hands and the shared hope of a quiet tomorrow. During a midday rest, a mother sits on a pile of salvaged timber. She unwraps a small piece of dark bread and shares it with her neighbor. From the deep pocket of her coat, she pulls out a crumpled piece of paper and a tiny piece of charcoal. She rests the paper on her knee, shielding it from the gentle spring breeze. She is writing a letter to her husband. She does not know where he is. She does not know if he is sitting in a quiet camp far across the sea, or if he is walking the long, broken roads back to their city. But she writes to him every day, casting her love into the void like a warm light in a dark window. "My dearest," she writes, the charcoal scratching softly against the coarse paper. "The sky is so blue today. We have cleared the street all the way to the old fountain. You would not recognize the square, but the sun still warms the stones exactly as it used to. I found the little ceramic bird you bought for me at the winter market. It was entirely unbroken. I have set it on the windowsill of the cellar. Please, keep walking. The heavy days are behind us now. The world is quiet, and I am making a place for you to rest." She folds the letter, placing it into a small wooden box where she keeps the others. It is an act of pure, quiet faith. In a world that had been torn apart by grand, terrifying ideologies, this simple, stubborn love is the true victory. It is the unbreakable tether that will eventually pull the wandering souls back home. And then, the spring rains finally arrive. They do not come as a violent storm, but as a soft, forgiving mist that sweeps across the continent. The rain falls gently onto the jagged ruins, washing the thick, gray ash from the salvaged bricks. It soaks into the dry, pulverized earth of the bomb craters, turning the dust into rich, dark soil. The smell of the rain hitting the broken plaster is sweet and earthy, the undeniable scent of the world taking a deep, cleansing breath. When the clouds part and the warm sun returns, a quiet miracle begins to unfold across the shattered landscape. Look closely at the corner of a ruined brick wall. There, pushing its way stubbornly through a crack in the scorched mortar, is a tiny, brilliant speck of green. It is a single, fragile shoot of ivy. It has no army. It has no map. It only has a quiet, unstoppable desire to reach toward the light. All across the city, the seeds that had been sleeping deep beneath the ash begin to wake. In the center of a massive crater, a small patch of wild chamomile opens its delicate white petals to the sun. Ferns begin to uncurl their bright green fronds from the damp shadows of the cellars. Small, brave blades of grass push their way through the cracks in the cobblestones, turning the gray streets into a soft, living mosaic. Nature does not judge the ruins. The earth does not care about the flags that flew or the empires that fell. It only knows how to heal. It wraps its green arms around the broken stones, softening the sharp edges, turning the monuments of human tragedy into quiet, beautiful gardens of wild growth. For the people clearing the rubble, these tiny green shoots are a profound and beautiful comfort. When a grandfather pauses in his work, leaning on his wooden shovel to catch his breath, he sees a single, yellow dandelion blooming in the dust. He smiles, a slow, deep smile that reaches all the way to his tired eyes. He knows what the dandelion means. It means that the poison has washed away. It means that the earth has forgiven them, and that life, in all its quiet, ordinary majesty, is returning. The children, who had spent their early years hiding in the dark, begin to play in the ruins. To them, the broken walls are not symbols of defeat, they are castles to be explored. They climb over the moss-covered stones, their laughter ringing out bright and clear like bells in the afternoon air. They find pieces of broken, colored glass, sapphire blues, ruby reds, and emerald greens, and hold them up to the sun, marveling at the way the light catches the fractured edges. They are taking the shattered pieces of the old world and imagining an entirely new one, built not on arrogance and steel, but on imagination and light. As the sun begins to set on the quiet city, casting long, golden shadows across the ivy-covered bricks, the women of the rubble gather their tools. They brush the dirt from their aprons and walk slowly back toward their makeshift homes. Their muscles ache, and their hands are tired, but their hearts are light. They have done good work today. They have made a little more room for tomorrow. The long, tragic history of the fallen empire is folding itself away into the pages of the past. The terrible beast that consumed the continent has been laid to rest, its grand, sweeping maps completely dissolved by the gentle, unstoppable rivers of spring. What remains is not a story of conquest, but a story of quiet, breathtaking endurance. It is the story of the watchmaker washing his face in the river. It is the story of the mother whispering fairy tales in the dark cellar. It is the story of the young soldier sharing a blanket in the ash, and the women passing bricks hand to hand in the sunlight. These are the true heroes of the world. They are the ordinary souls who carried the heavy, unendurable weight of history on their shoulders, and who emerged from the darkest night with their capacity to love entirely intact. The war is over. The sky is clear. The seeds have been planted in the ruins, and they are already beginning to grow. Listen to the soft, rhythmic sound of the evening breeze rustling the leaves of the new saplings. It is a gentle, soothing lullaby, singing the broken world back to sleep. Let the heavy burdens of the past slip from your own shoulders. Let the dust settle, and let the quiet, peaceful dark wrap around you like a warm blanket. Close your eyes. Breathe in the sweet, clean scent of the healing earth. The long journey is finally done. You are safe, you are warm, and it is time to rest, and to dream of the beautiful, green world waiting for you in the morning.